And then as they approached the scene, they could see some blood on the ground and his body partly covered by some brambles just off the pathway. The police were called.
I just remember it was a Saturday, I was at home, and I just remember hearing these police sirens screaming through the village.
I didn't actually come till the afternoon and arrived here. So all these police cars, all these police cars around for us, but it's quite bizarre.
Rumours about the discovery of a body in undergrowth fly through the villages.
An initial assessment suggested that he may have been subject to an animal attack.
One early theory was an attack from an animal, and that was mainly led from the extent of the injuries. Obviously, there's Banham Zoo, not a huge distance away.
I was very sceptical of that because we know what's in the woods, and I can't think of a wild animal that had been over there to do such damage, to kill somebody. There isn't animals over there to do that.
The news spreads among the local dog-walking community. Could a wild animal really have attacked and killed a man on their doorstep?
There was a sense of fear, but that kind of not really believing it was going on in the village.
I think it was a bit of a shock to everybody. And it's not something that happens in this area. It certainly put us off walking our dogs there for a while. I had a young daughter at the time, she was only 3, and I wasn't keen on taking her there, you know.
Rookie journalist Zach Ward was one of the first to get wind of the story.
So at the time, I felt shocked, I felt surprised. This was my first job in journalism. It was our goal to try and handle it sensitively. The stories we normally covered at This Express were very community-based. They were human interest. It was about council tax going up. It was people's 100th birthdays. It was that level of local news. So when we say things like this don't happen, that's not a cliche, it's genuine. We had really very little experience in covering this major event.
Police finally identify the body in the woods as 83-year-old Peter Wrighton. But who is he?
Mr. Wrighton was retired. He lived with his wife. He had 2 dogs, one 13 and one 9 or 10 years old, that he walked regularly.
He had retired to Banham, which is about 5 miles as the crow flies to East Harling. He'd worked for BT for 35 years. He'd been married for 59 years, and he sounded like a gentle, kind, loving man. Loved his dogs. He was walking with Gemma and Dylan at the time, and they both stayed with the body, which I think that tells you the bond between dog and owner. But he sounded like a really well-respected member of the community, and we got an outpouring of tributes and sympathy once his name had been released.
The first time we moved in, we went and introduced ourselves to the neighbours. Peter and Anne were very, very welcoming. One of our first things to do was to invite them over for a meal.
They were always friendly. You'd go over there, they're always welcome to. And obviously they used to take their dogs out for a walk, both of them. And they loved dogs, so they took in a lot of rescue dogs.
Father of 2, Peter was a daily visitor with his 2 dogs to the Heath, just a few miles from his home in Banham. Tragically, on the morning of his death, his wife Anne had gone in search of him when he hadn't returned home.
Been shopping, and on my way back, I was driving by, and Anne pulled out her car and drove towards Harling. I thought that was rather unusual for her to go out and leave the house empty without them being out together. I didn't think much more of it than that.
Mr. Wrighton had failed to return home, and Mrs. Wrighton became concerned and actually drove out to the Heath to look for her husband in case possibly he'd had a medical event or become lost. As she approached the scene, she made herself known to the police, who were already there.
While Peter's wife is escorted home, his body is taken for a post-mortem examination to verify the cause of death.
When the post-mortem took place, it was established that he had received quite a violent attack, probably initially from behind. Many of the stabbing injuries were to the back of his neck and a cut across his throat that actually cut all the way back to the spinal column. May have taken 4 or 5 sideways cuts. It almost severed his head. There were other significant injuries, a stab wound that went into his left eye.
The result immediately changes the course of the investigation.
We had a phone call from Anne informing us that Peter had been murdered.
But what had gone on? Why would someone want to kill such a well-respected member of the community in such a violent way? In the quaint countryside of East Harling, a post-mortem examination has just revealed that far from being killed by a wild animal, much-loved pensioner Peter Wrighton had been murdered. But why?
I think someone may have put a suggestion forward that it could have been as a result of an animal attack. But when you consider the circumstances, it would appear the way he had been deposited, he had been dragged backwards and his arms were on top of him, which would be unlikely if he was pulled there by an animal.
Mr. Wrighton had been stabbed over 40 times, including some very deep wounds to his throat, which had almost severed his head from the rest of his body.
It was a violent and aggressive attack with only one outcome likely with the way that he was attacked.
Immediately, a murder investigation is launched to track down the killer. And everyone is a potential suspect.
This was the biggest manhunt for a long, long time.
We've got additional officers in the local area at the scene of the murder. We've also increased our patrols and our police visible presence in and around East Harling.
They were very present, patrolling up and down the road. There was mounted police going around the village on horseback.
At the back of the forest here, the police stopped me all the cars and asking you, what, were you on that day, were you here, taking your name, address and so forth.
Police officers involved in the investigation will have been looking for dog walkers in the area. People have routines and return to places quite regularly, and therefore they will also have people on the heath at the same time, the same day, several days after, to pick up those who regularly go and may have been there in the morning.
As the police were searching the crime scene here, they cut all the grass down really short. All this field was cut very short. All the hedgerow here was cut down to virtually nothing. I guess they're looking for the weapon, I guess.
As news spreads throughout the local dog walking community that there's a killer at large, so does the fear.
When the murder investigation started, nobody was walking the dogs over the woods. They didn't know who it was.
When people first found out about the murder, then I think it was one of complete disbelief that something like that had happened in the area. And then I think probably naturally mixed in with a bit of fear around who was this person that had committed the crime and were they still at large.
I mean, this was in broad daylight. This was at 10:30 in the morning, potentially. So I think afterwards people were wary. I think people were wary about walking their dogs on their own.
Police established that the 5th of August 2017 started out like any other day for Peter Wrighton.
It was a very typical day for him. He'd been to the shop earlier, he was walking his dogs.
Peter was picked up on CCTV at a local shop at 9:57 a.m. his car was spotted at 10:14 a.m, heading to the heathland to walk his 2 dogs. 30 minutes later, his body was discovered.
Police emergency, how can I help you?
Mr. Wrighton's wallet was still on him. His car keys were still with him, making it unlikely that it was a robbery. The Heath really is a friendly area that people go for relaxation and just to walk dogs and just to get out and get some fresh air, etc. It's not somewhere where you would expect this level of violence.
Another potential theory was around other uses of the area. One dog walker who had used the area quite regularly had mentioned to police that he thought there was suspicious activity involving drugs and people buying drugs around that area.
Police quickly rule out a robbery gone wrong. So who would want to cause this quiet, friendly pensioner harm?
The majority of murders occur between people who know each other. And so an initial line of inquiry would be to establish those people who know him and anyone who may have any sort of grudge or dislike or whatever for Mr. Wrighton. You tend to work in concentric circles around the victim, and so you look very close and then you gradually branch out and expand your inquiry, eliminating people as you go.
Peter was quite reserved, he was quite quiet, because he was such a kind, gentle soul, and happily married to Anne. It didn't make any sense. How could somebody be so wicked? To pick on somebody so kind, so loving?
His son and daughter live away and could be easily established as not having been in the Norfolk area, so that would eliminate those family members. And therefore the police then need to look further outside the family unit and expand their inquiries.
You know, we tried to think about people that knew all of us. Could it be anybody that we knew?
Any other significant friendships or relationships before his move to the area?
And we came up with no's everywhere, so it had to be random.
With no obvious clues in Peter's past, police turned to the media and the public for help.
If members of the public have any information at all, even if people think this is a small snippet of information, tell us, because it might be a small bit of information that's the final pieces of the jigsaw that we need. We're really, really keen for anybody that was in and around the area between 9 a.m. and 11 a.m. on Saturday the 5th of August. This was an 83-year-old family man. It was a brutal attack with no known motive at this time, leaving behind a wife and children.
Another major line of inquiry is through the media to try to gain intelligence from and identify members of the public who may have been in the area at the time.
The police had appealed for information, and the initial amount of people coming forward with information was really, really high. We're talking about the hundreds.
It's important you get to people as soon as possible so that that image is as clear as possible in their minds.
Intensive questioning of local dog walkers starts to give police some leads.
That's the day of the murder. I came up the second day and the policeman said to me, "What are you doing here?" basically. I was a little bit scared because I thought perhaps maybe they would think it was me, because my footprints would be on the soil here and everything, and touch certain things, I guess, so forth. DNA, that sort of stuff, I guess. I don't know how that kind of works, but quite scary at the time.
Didn't sink in at first. And then when they're talking about, oh, it happened such and such, and I thought, well, I was in the forest then.
So as part of the appeals, initially the police were wanting to speak to 2 male individuals and gave very detailed descriptions.
Police rule out the 2 dog walkers. But Peter Bibby is pulled in for questioning.
I had an interview at work, an interview at home, where they took all fingerprints, DNA.
That's it. Good boy.
They even took DNA off the dog, took all my clothes.
Good boy.
Yeah, it was quite harrowing, but I suppose everybody's a suspect till you're proven innocent.
But unknown to Peter, something he had witnessed on the morning of the 5th of August was about to turn the investigation on its head.
It was a normal day over the heath. Met quite a few new people, which was quite nice, a few of the people that I used to know. Yeah, just a really nice, peaceful day. Yeah, this is the route that I took. I regularly walk this ridge, and this gate wasn't there at the time. So I would come along here, and then I turned down and walked back through the woods in a round circle. Saw somebody walking towards us, and he just didn't look right. He wasn't dressed for walking in the forest. He didn't have a dog. He wasn't with anybody else. It was just totally out of sync.
Through their inquiries, they identified another person who'd been dog walking on the heath at the time, who had spoken to someone who seemed out of place. Didn't seem to be dressed to be walking, didn't have a dog. You know, dog walkers tend to, it's not a uniform they wear, but they tend to dress in similar ways and know who looks in or out of place.
On his feet, he had like heavy-duty flip-flops and a pair of shorts and a T-shirt. Very smartly dressed and was totally out of character for walking dogs in the forest. We were both walking up wheel ruts of a car. So I was walking up the right-hand one, he was coming down the left-hand one. When we actually passed, he was about this far away from me. I could have put my hand out and touched him. If I hadn't said hello to him, he'd have definitely walked past me and wouldn't have given me the time of day. There was no chance of any eye contact, not even any feinted little glances. He had his head forward and he was just walking forward and ignoring everything. And then he went on, and then I was wondering to myself, what's he doing? Where's he going? It's not right.
He provided an e-fit of this person that became very key to the investigation later on.
I do regret not following him to see where he went. Yeah. And that's sort of like bugged me for a while.
Suddenly, police have a description of a man they believe could hold the key as to what went on that morning on the heathland. They release an e-fit. But who is this man? And is he a killer? The rural Norfolk countryside is still reeling 6 days after 83-year-old Peter Wrighton was murdered on the heathland while walking his dog.
Shocking events such as these have a significant impact on the community. One of the first things the local police inspector will do is a community impact assessment to try and reach out to the community and reassure them that the police are doing as much as they can to protect them and to resolve whatever the incident is that's happened.
Such a shock for this area because it seems so safe and so sort of old-fashioned in a way. I guess you leave your doors unlocked, you have keys in your car, and no one expects you want to get murdered. It's just quite bizarre. Afterwards, people are quite scared of walking the dogs in the forest.
Police still have no suspects, no murder weapon, and no motive.
I think any time there has been a murder in these sort of circumstances and no one's been found, there's likely to be wariness, there's likely to be some people who sadly won't want to leave the house. That shock was always there, I think. It was random, it was unprovoked, it literally could happen to anybody.
It wasn't safe for any of us. If there's a murderer already, it's murdered Peter. Was it something personal or not? We didn't know. After the murder of Peter, I was very reluctant to leave the house.
Having turned to the public for help, police receive information about a man who had stood out on the heath on the morning of the murder.
I just saw his feet first, and I thought he's wearing like heavy-duty flip-flops. It's not the sort of attire that you'd think of going dog walking. Pair of shorts on, Most people don't wear shorts through there because of the nettles, bits of bracken and all sorts of stuff like that. He was walking with a purpose.
Police release an e-fit of the man described, and suddenly there's a breakthrough. Police receive a tip-off about a local man, 24-year-old Alexander Palmer.
So, following the police appeals, a psychiatrist who had worked with Alexander Palmer then came forward with some concerns around previous things that Palmer had said.
The psychologist told the police that when treating Alexander Palmer, he had ideations of violent attacks, often with a knife.
Palmer had talked about his desire to attack random people. The voice in his head he called Little Alex.
Once Alexander Palmer was known to the inquiry, he was allocated to a team of detectives as a person of interest. Having obtained a photograph from Facebook, it was immediately apparent that there was a very strong likeness with the e-fit that had been provided by one of the dog walkers.
So at the time we knew that Palmer was 24 years old and he lived in Cringleford in Norfolk, and he had previously been a part of the armed forces.
Having identified Alexander Palmer as a suspect, an arrest strategy was prepared and he was arrested at 4:40 the following morning.
News of the arrest quickly spreads.
I wasn't sleeping. Quite paranoid about it all. I always kept looking at my iPad, to see if there'd been any updates. And I think there's one at 3 o'clock in the morning, the first published Alexander's name. So I quickly thought I'd have a look at Facebook. And lo and behold, there he was. As soon as I saw him on Facebook, I realised that was him. Without a shadow of a doubt.
After Alexander was arrested, they'd informed Anne, and Anne informed us that someone had been arrested for it, which was a relief for us.
As part of the arrest strategy, having been brought into custody, various forensic samples and a DNA swab will have been taken from Palmer, which will have been fast-tracked to the laboratory to try to get a profile as soon as possible. Having an outstanding profile from Mr. Wrighton's trousers, they need to know as soon as possible whether there could be any link to Alexander Palmer.
With forensic evidence being processed, Palmer himself is brought in for questioning.
Alex, can I get you to introduce yourself, please? Alexander Hobbs Palmer. As I said, an e-fit was prepared from a description. Have a look at that. What would you say about that?
That's a pretty good likeness.
Alexander admitted that he had been in the area at the time.
During the first interview, Palmer revealed that he had been in the area. He said that he had travelled there and feeling depressed, he had stood there and had cried to himself and had walked about and then returned to his car, parked somewhere separately and had another walk and then left the area.
He was quite adamant about it, that he had not done it. He was not the killer. There was a Roman road that dissected the wood. Mr. Wrighton had been killed on the west side of the road. Alexander said that he'd been on the east side at all times. I found him to be pretty calm, composed. He was intelligent.
Despite Palmer's denials, on the ground, detectives worked tirelessly to find evidence to link him to the crime.
You're looking for something that will link him to the scene, something that will link him to Mr. Wrighton. So you're going to look for any clothes that have been worn at any locations that he's been to, so a house, lock-up, work, vehicles that he may have used, looking to seize as many items as possible to initially assess them and then send them for forensic examination.
And it isn't long before forensic investigations start to produce results.
It was the second day of interviews that the positive result on the DNA matching Alexander Palmer to the DNA profile found on the trousers, probably where he dragged Mr. Wrighton into the bushes, grabbing his trousers to pull him along.
What could be his DNA was found on Mr. Wrighton's trousers, and what could have been Mr. Wrighton's blood was found on the collar of a jacket that belonged to Alexander.
That was the main evidence to link Alexander Palmer to Peter Wrighton, and obviously that then entered into the interview strategy.
Can you explain to me why your DNA is on that man?
I'm afraid I can't without knowing.
You don't need to know. It's irrelevant where it is. You say you haven't met him. Why is your DNA on him?
For instance, I could have lost a hair follicle and caught on his shoe. That's just me speculating, but without knowing, I couldn't venture a guess.
Okay.
Police now have a DNA link between the two men, but need further proof linking Palmer to the crime.
A search of his car identified a map which had markings on it indicating the area of the heath, which is obviously of interest because it indicates some sort of pre-planning before going to the scene.
There was ANPR data, the number plate recognition, which put Palmer at the location at the day of the murder.
Some ANPR evidence had been recovered with Palmer driving his car in the morning when dropping his partner off in the city, which showed him apparently in a white or light-coloured shirt, and when he was seen picking her up in the afternoon, he was seen in a dark-coloured shirt. And yet his account was that he had been wearing the same clothes all day, but he appeared to have changed his clothing, and none of that clothing, which is highly likely to have been heavily bloodstained, was ever recovered.
Police believe they have irrefutable proof that Palmer killed Peter Wrighton, but they still don't know why or what with, and their suspect is now refusing to talk.
I'll ask you again, were you involved in the murder of Peter Wrighton? No comment.
He made it very clear that he was not guilty, was not responsible, and he hadn't done the killing. And that remained his position throughout.
Detectives analyse Palmer's phone records and come across a damning photograph.
It was established that he had bought a hunting-type knife, and in fact there was a picture of it, I think, on his phone. That picture of the knife was shown to the forensic pathologist, who confirmed that it could have caused the injuries.
Alexander Palmer is charged with murder. But what was his motive? And what drove him to kill? February 2018. And Alexander Palmer is standing trial at Nottingham Crown Court, accused of murdering Peter Wrighton in August 2017. A crime which had sent shockwaves through the small, close-knit community of East Harling.
I think my first initial thought was, whoever done this is a coward. The nature of the frenzy that murderer did. It was a cowardly act on an old man who's out walking dogs.
Totally shocked. I couldn't believe it because it's such a quiet and peaceful place. It just seemed incredible it could happen here. It just seemed impossible, really.
Prior to the court case, Palmer has to undergo psychological assessments to determine his capacity to stand trial.
I believe he's initially sent to Belmarsh Prison and then to Rampton for that assessment. And the question to be answered was, Was Alexander Palmer mad or bad? Had he carried out this attack because of a mental illness that he was suffering from, or was he just a very violent and nasty person?
So who is Alexander Palmer?
When I first met Alexander, he was 24 years old. He'd been 23 at the time of the offence. He had no previous convictions, no cautions, no findings of guilt, no reprimands, nothing, so far as the police were concerned, that would suggest that he would commit such a violent offence. He'd served in the British Army till about 2015. He had trained and qualified as a commando, one of the few who actually qualified in his year. But there was one thing of note. In March of 2014, a fellow trainee had stamped on his head, and that was plainly the beginning of his mental problems. Because of that, he had been medically discharged from the army.
Throughout 2015, Palmer was treated as both an inpatient and an outpatient in mental health services, seen by several different psychologists, but one expressed concern to the police after seeing media appeals about the murder.
One of the people that contacted the control room was a psychologist who had worked previously with Palmer following an assault on Palmer whilst he was serving in the forces that had an effect on him.
And one piece of information comes to light which is particularly chilling.
The psychologist told the police that he had a dislike for dog walkers.
Dog walkers, he said, were a particular bugbear of his.
He was obviously suffering some mental health problems brought on by PTSD. He had some kind of grievance with dog walkers is the thing that stands out.
He had made disclosures about ideations around violence and a dislike of dog walkers.
Having been deemed fit to stand trial, the court hears how Alex had revealed on arrest that he heard voices in his head.
Palmer had talked about the voice in his head he called Little Alex.
Is there a different Alex? At times, yes. Okay, who's he?
He used to manifest himself as a physical hallucination, but now he's just a voice.
Is he still with us?
Yes.
Is he here today?
Yes.
Where is he now?
What is in my head?
He's there, is he?
Palmer admits being on the Heathlands on the day of the murder.
So was Alex there that day? The other Alex?
He's always there, so
He's always there, so he would have been with you, okay? Was he? Do you remember him talking to you on that day?
No.
You don't? But you say he talks to you every day?
Yes.
He's there laughing at you?
Laughing.
But you say he doesn't tell you what to do? He doesn't force you to do things or anything like that? No.
Palmer, during the court case, had said that he had visited the woodland because he was feeling low, but didn't say that he'd been involved in the attack.
But the prosecution puts forward evidence linking Palmer to Peter Wrighton.
Several of Mr. Wrighton's clothes were sent for forensic examination, and they had identified DNA from a person on the leg of his trousers.
I believe there was DNA found on Mr. Wrighton as well, which linked Palmer to the murder.
The court also hears that on the morning of the murder, ANPR cameras picked up Palmer's black Ford Focus on the A11, heading towards the Heath. Mobile phone records reveal he is stationary on the area of the Heath from 10:19 a.m. for a period of 32 minutes and 55 seconds. His car is then picked up heading north on the A11. The whole journey, police believe, had been planned in advance.
A search of his car identified a map with the area marked out.
In fact, investigations reveal Palmer had completed the exact same journey 2 weeks prior to the murder. Had it been a practice run, or had he intended to kill on that day? Either way, it was Peter who found himself at the end of Palmer's wrath on that fateful day.
Why did you pick Peter?
Being that Peter's about my stature and a bit older than I am, Peter was easy prey for Alexander.
But did Peter actually try to help this man? We don't know. Nobody will ever know. Because this man won't say anything now. Did Peter try to help him? Peter suffered for it. We don't know.
It was also revealed that despite his age and smaller stature, Peter had tried to fight off his attacker.
He had what we would refer to as defensive marks on his hand. It would appear that he tried to grab the blade of the knife to stop his assailant.
It was unprovoked, and he was a very, very old man that couldn't defend himself. Alexander's quite a strong lad, you know, military background, very fit and able. Peter Wrighton could hardly stand up. I think very cowardly.
The prosecution revealed further evidence that Palmer had planned to kill. Police had found a notebook in a storage facility belonging to Palmer, in which it appeared he had written of his plans.
So in January of 2015, he said he was thinking of going for dog walkers. He said that he hated dog walkers and that if he did this, he would be up on a pedestal, up with the big ones. Everyone would look up to him. Everyone would know his name.
But while police did discover the notebook, there's one thing they never did find: the knife he used to kill Peter.
The prosecution case would be the steps that he had taken to get rid of any forensic evidence would indicate a knowledge of what he had done and an intention to cover up what he had done.
On the advice of his barrister, Palmer does not give evidence in his trial.
I explained to him that it's his case, his future, his liberty that's at stake, and that we act as a voice for him in the courtroom.
The notebook, DNA, witness statements, and the EFIT, as well as Palmer's medical records, are put to the court.
The prosecution case was a strong one. ANPR evidence in relation to his vehicle and cell site evidence in relation to his phone showed that he had been in the area at the relevant time. In addition to that, there was evidence from 2 eyewitnesses who had given descriptions of the person who was likely to have been Mr. Wrighton's attacker. And those descriptions were quite similar to the appearance of Alexander. One of those 2 witnesses had made an EFIT, and again, the EFIT was quite similar to Alexander's appearance. There was no direct evidence, but if you put all those matters together, it represents quite a strong case.
Having heard all the evidence, the jury retire to consider their verdict.
The trial came to a conclusion and the jury found Alexander Palmer guilty of murder.
When a jury decides after 49 minutes, I think there's obviously overwhelming evidence to suggest that Palmer was the person who carried out the murder. That was the one thing that stood out for me at the trial, is how quickly they decided that Palmer was guilty of the murder.
Despite evidence of Palmer's mental health problems, the judge ruled that he had meticulously planned the murder.
The statutory sentence is life imprisonment, but there is a recommendation from the judge, which in this case was 28 years. I would suggest that the fact that once convicted and imprisoned, he was sent to a normal prison rather than a psychiatric prison indicates that the assessment was that he was a violent and nasty person.
Good girl, good girl. Come on.
The dog walkers of East Harling will never forget the horrifying crime which leaves its mark on this close-knit community.
Not the same in the forest here for months. People were not relaxed, they're very nervous, looking over their shoulder all the time. I was doing the same, actually, looking over your shoulder, seeing what cars were parked here. It was very bizarre, kind of chilling feeling afterwards.
And for Peter Bibby, his brush with evil will live with him forever.
It was quite a scary thing, and it's all the what ifs. What if I had gone back? You know, would have changed things. I was walking straight forward to him. It could have been me.
Investigate an infamous case stage by stage to appreciate the full picture in OJ Made in America, available now on Sky Documentaries.
I'd never heard anybody say a wrong word about her.
Didn't seem to me like she's got any enemies in the world.
Cheshire Fire and Rescue received a call of multiple fires at property.
News of a devastating fire in the Cheshire countryside.
Once those fires had died down, there was no sign of her.
Where is the owner, and are they safe? When the deceased is found, clearly the state of the body, how it's been found, clearly a murder from the off.
I can't believe anybody would treat Diane like that.
Police believe she was murdered and then her home deliberately set alight.
In the middle of the Cheshire countryside lies a quiet, quaint hamlet. Cranage.
It's quite an affluent area in parts. There's some big houses. There's a lot of farms around there, quite isolated at parts, and dairy farms, chicken farms. As well as being quite small, there's obviously the classic community feel towards it, whereby everybody knows everyone, and that's pretty much central to a place like Cranage.
The area is a really desirable place to live. I mean, a lot of people with a lot of money want to come and share what we've got out here. You know, we've got quite a lot of famous footballers in the area.
It's a lovely area, and it's just a nice area to live.
In the heart of the village sits Parklands Cattery, run by popular local Diana Lee.
Diane was a lovely girl that would always help people out. Very, very conscientious, very bright. You never saw her without a smile on her face. She was always very bubbly and just a lovely person. I'd never heard anybody say a wrong word about her.
She was always such a lovely lady, very full of the joys of spring, and didn't seem to me like she's got any enemies in the world. You know, she's that type of really likeable person.
Originally from Tabley, Diana moved to Cranage in 2008 and opened her own cattery business. And it thrived.
Diana opened the business with an ex-partner at the property and been quite successful in doing so. That partner then left that business and she continued to run the cattery on her own.
But Parklands wasn't just any cattery. It was the creme de la creme of the feline world.
She loved cats, and that's why she created the business that she did do, which was probably a little bit unique to Cheshire and this environment. So offering TVs and beds, sort of prices that probably slightly higher than maybe other areas of the country. So yeah, I mean, that showed probably her caring side more than anything else.
I think anybody that wanted to trust anybody with an animal, you'd only have to be in the presence of Diane for a few minutes and you'd soon be contented the mind that your animal would be in safe hands and well looked after, well cared for, because she's just that caring nature.
Diana lived in a large gated detached property next door to her cattery, but she didn't live alone.
Being a big property at Parklands, Diana had a lodger who lived with her at that time, probably a bit of company, and also to help with the income coming in and to upkeep such a large property and the business as well.
On the 8th of August 2012, Diana meets friends for dinner, something which she often does in her spare time.
Diana met up with some friends in Knutsford at the Man's End Chinese restaurant on King Street, where she spent the evening with them.
She got a lot of friends, Diane had, and she'd be out with different groups of friends quite a lot.
But little does Diana know, that evening with friends is to change life forever and leave a lasting scar on the close-knit community.
11 a.m, Cheshire Fire and Rescue received a call of multiple fires at a property in Cranage.
The scene was discovered through a family relative going to the address. They go to the house, they see fire coming from, smoke coming from the house and the garage. A neighbour was alerted who rang the fire brigade.
Emergency services arrive and work tirelessly to put out the fire.
Once those fires had died down and they'd been treated with, they'd realised that Diana's car wasn't at the property and there was no sign of her.
That's the main concern for the police, would be where is the owner and are they safe? The police have got a report of a fire. You've got a relative who's turned up who can't find the owner. Clearly there's a number of seats of fire. Straight away you'd be thinking there's something suspicious regarding this, particularly if you're looking at an affluent property like we've got here.
The fire experts are going to be looking at whether it's a deliberately set fire, whether it appears to be an electrical fire, whether it's potentially a chip pan that's gone over. And as soon as the idea that a fire has been deliberately set, everyone's mind goes into very suspicious.
Fire officers keep searching the property grounds and enter the adjacent garage. And what they find changes the course of the investigation.
They found her body at the property, and at that point, police were called to investigate.
When Diana's body was discovered, the most obvious thing that would be clear to the first attenders is that the body was, certainly on the surface, badly burnt. That raises a whole number of possible scenarios. An accident, misadventure.
Cheshire police immediately arrive at the scene.
In the time I've served in the police as an investigator, I've been involved with many inquiries. The early priorities are the scene, first scene where the victim is.
But it's where Diana's body is that raises suspicion. She is found lying face down on a wheelbarrow. She is naked, covered in shredded paper and bedding. Her body battered with horrific injuries.
When the deceased is found, clearly the state of the body, how it's been found, is clearly a murder from the off.
Police believe the extent of the injuries are not just caused by the fire, so a murder investigation is launched.
The most important thing is to preserve the scene. The slightest disturbance of a scene, by trampling through it, walking through it innocently, it causes contamination. So it's really, really important to make sure that it's cordoned off.
You only get one go at recovering evidence from a body, and one that is already compromised. There will be a lot of discussion about what should be sampled at the scene, what should be done at the scene, what is going to be compromised by another action. So there will be a lot of effort going into preserving as much evidence as possible.
News of the shocking crime spreads quickly through the close-knit community.
I can't believe anybody would treat Diane like that and do so much harm. It just seems horrendous. I just can't comprehend it.
In the quiet, quaint village of Cranage, the community is shocked at the news of a murder. But the previous evening, August 8th, started off like a normal night out for 54-year-old Diana Lee. At 8 p.m, Diana met up with friends and had dinner in a local Chinese restaurant. According to friends, she said goodbye to them at 10:15 p.m. before driving home. Early the following morning, Diana sent a text to a friend.
Diana's phone records on the morning of her death showed that she'd texted a friend saying she wasn't feeling very well, she's feeling sick, and that she'd like her to collect a cat later in the day.
But just a few hours later, her property was engulfed in flames.
Fire brigade and the police attend, and we find the horrible scene in the garage of the victim.
She was found dead in her home, and police had opened a murder investigation.
News of the horrific attack quickly spreads.
A call came through from a contact who had been driving past the area saying there was lots of activity in Cranage itself, so we decided to come down. When we came down here, there was essentially fire pumps as well as emergency services, police and ambulance as well. Whenever you have a scene of maybe 3 or 4 police vehicles and 4 fire engines, you know that something's pretty serious. The tape was quite high up. They'd sort of cordoned off here, and it was difficult to get any closer than this, really. But obviously, there's lots of residents coming down here, trying to find out what had been taking place.
And the quiet village of Cranage is now the centre of an atrocious crime, and fear spreads that there's a killer on the loose.
The feeling in the community was just of absolute shock, a disbelief that, I mean, things like murders don't happen around here.
I think from the outset, it was shock more than anything, and for it to happen for these residents on what is their doorstep was probably a big shock to them.
The fears for a community is who would do such an awful crime, and they're still out there. Could they strike again?
There was a real lack of understanding of that somebody could do this.
The question crossing the community's mind: who could have murdered Diana, and why?
Certainly, any murder, there's rumour and speculation about the victim and the motive for a murder or who could have done it.
Some murders are spontaneous, a lot of it is finance. So you'd be looking at straight away what the lady does for a living. Is the money owed? Has it just been a random targeted attack by some local or someone travelling?
Police need to act fast, so they search the house. But they quickly come across a startling piece of evidence.
There was evidence of the victim's clothing in the lodger's bedroom, and also a blood-stained knife which belonged to the lodger. So he's got access to the house, he's got access to the garage. He may have been in a relationship with this lady. So you've got to treat that individual as a suspect. You would have to arrest them.
With such obvious evidence potentially linking the lodger to the crime, police need to establish his movements in the hours Diana was last seen alive.
From their point of view, it was a case of trying to find out their background, where they were at the time of the incident, what they'd been up to, trying to find all sorts of reasons why they could have committed a crime such as this one.
The lodger tells detectives that he last saw Diana at 7:30 p.m. in the garden before she left in her car to have dinner with friends in Knutsford. He goes on to say that he left for work at 6 a.m. and remembers seeing Diana's car parked on the driveway. While police unpick the lodger's alibi to see if it stacks up, the team on the ground make a breakthrough discovery.
They found that Diana's car had been abandoned 10 miles away in Mobley. At that point, they'd also had reports from a taxi driver who had seen a man acting suspicious in the area, who'd also tried to torch the vehicle before running off.
A witness came forward, a taxi driver, to say that he'd seen someone trying to set fire to the car. He challenged the driver, and the driver made off on a bike, and then he's made off on fields. So again, the push bike would be a scene, and there'd be searches going around that area.
Was this man Diana's lodger? And had he driven Diana's car 10 miles north? But while police gather evidence, another arrest is made.
It was a person who was known to Diana, who'd been an ex-partner, who had been convicted previously of a charge against her. He had convictions against Diana in terms of beating her.
There were two immediate suspects, two men who were in her life. So there was a lodger, and there was some circumstantial evidence that suggested that he was not all he said he was. And then there was a very violent ex who had actually been imprisoned for attacking her. So two quite strong suspects.
But police are soon able to confirm Diana's lodger was at work the entire day from 6 a.m, hours before the fire had started. He is released without charge. And with the items of evidence found in his room, detectives now suspect the lodger was set up for murder. But by who? With Diana's ex still in custody, police take a more in-depth look at him and his whereabouts.
The large proportion of domestic murders is sometimes it's an ex-partner. Clearly the ex-partner was a prime suspect very early on. Well, the motive is he knows the victim, it's previous violent history towards the victim, so straight away you'd be alarm bells going.
We were all pretty convinced who'd actually done this.
The local community recalled Diana had once lived a life in fear from her ex.
Somebody that she'd known was banned from being in the area, and she knew that he'd been at the house. Certain things had moved, and she was petrified. And she gave me a call, and I went down to have a look to see if there was anybody there. I'd never seen anybody so petrified.
And the location of Diana's car further cements police suspicions. It was dumped between her house and that of her ex's.
The investigating officers realised that the car had been found in a location that was en route to the person, so it probably made sense in their minds that, again, he was the person who'd committed this crime.
Questioning of Diana's ex intensifies.
Is he still in contact? Where does he live? What were his movements for the day or the time of the murder, to eliminate them from the inquiry? So after a couple of days of speaking to the person who they'd arrested, it quickly became apparent that that individual had a solid alibi.
With his whereabouts on the night of Diana's murder confirmed, her ex-partner is released. Having followed strong leads and had two potential suspects, detectives are back to square one.
It was a case whereby the police had to reappeal for information. It was a case of them having come across a bit of a dead end and having to start again to see who had committed this crime.
But post-mortem results come in and help police identify the cause of her death. Could this provide further clues to her attacker?
If somebody has died before a fire, then you will sometimes see soot in the mouth, you will sometimes see it as far as the larynx. But to get it down into the lungs, somebody has to be breathing, answer that vital question, was this person alive when the fire was burning? And you'll be seeing that she hasn't inhaled soot, she hasn't inhaled the products of combustion. All of this is pointing to her being dead and then set alight, rather than either a deliberate act by herself or some sort of strange accident with solvents. She died of head injuries, so there was clear evidence of bleeding in the head resulting from impacts that is very different to what you see if there's simply damage to the head from it being heated in a fire.
Police now know Diana died before her lifeless body was dumped and the garage set alight, meaning the killer tried to cover his tracks.
DNA will be damaged by the heat that the fire produces, but certainly trace evidence, if one looks hard enough, it can be recovered.
Forensics locate a small amount of unknown DNA on Diana. And there's something else.
There's no self-defense wounds. That information from the pathologist would clearly indicate generally that she knew the person was there with consent in the property, and that they weren't expecting that trauma to be caused to them.
Detectives now believe Diana's killer was known to her, so need to delve into her private life and turn to the community for help.
Community's key to any murder inquiry because they're the eyes and ears, and they probably hold evidence what they don't know at the time.
I get the feeling, as you do in so many of these cases, that Diana was actually quite a vulnerable person. She was living alone. She was probably fairly happy, having come out of an abusive and violent relationship. She was building things up again.
Maybe the situation has arose where she was probably too trusting of somebody.
Friends express their concerns that perhaps all was not as it seemed in Diana's life.
I should imagine she was easily taken advantage of in a financial way because she was quite a wealthy lady. A few times when I saw her passing, she seemed like very troubled, as though she wasn't her usual self, and she was obviously hiding something that she was really concerned about, but she never really told me the full extent of it, and that was a bit of a worry for me, you know, what was going on with her. But I think most people would have realised something was not quite right, but because she was a private person, she didn't really explain to me exactly what was going on. And I just said to her, if you ever have any problems, you must report things if there's something you need to report. But she wouldn't tell me anything in detail or anything.
With those close to Diana unable to shed light on her private life, the investigation intensifies, and police expand their search, trawling through local businesses and residential CCTV on the night Diana was last seen alive.
CCTV is huge on any major incident and murder inquiry, whether it's from the local council's CCTV, the police ANPR cameras, and then people's own CCTV from shops, businesses and private CCTV. A lot of the houses in this area will have their own CCTV. And if you get a fleeting glance of a vehicle or a person, that is key to an inquiry to identify people who have been at the scene.
So for the police officers investigating this case, they had a bit of a break when they found the CCTV footage on King Street of Diana leaving the restaurant, but at the same time they were left slightly puzzled by her movements, which were caught on an ANPR camera, which saw her headed away from her home address in Cranage and towards the Altrincham area of Greater Manchester.
What the police couldn't account for is about 45 minutes in between her leaving her friends and arriving home. So that gap in time was something that the police really needed to find out. Where was she going? Who was she seeing? Who was she meeting? That 45 minutes for the police would have been absolutely crucial because nobody could explain where she'd gone. So there was something in Diana's life that the police didn't know about.
With this latest piece of information, police look closely at Diana's phone records and notice something suspicious.
So as the officers trawled through Diana's phone records, they found a number that she'd been communicating with on a regular occurrence, but had stopped doing so in January of that year.
Is another suspect in their sights?
That number belonged to a David Ryan, who lived in Hale in Greater Manchester.
It's been several weeks since local Diana Lee was found murdered in her home in Cranage. Police have questioned and released 2 men known to Diana, and 13 days after her body was discovered, police release an e-fit.
The police issued an e-fit of someone who they wanted to speak to. That individual was a person who was with the Corsa, which was seen trying to set fire to it and then made off on a push bike. It's really important that people try and recall what they were doing that day at that time, because they may have seen that offender leaving the scene.
With officers waiting for tip-offs from members of the public following the release of the e-fit, and having eliminated 2 suspects that are known to Diana, detectives have also been trawling through Diana's phone and have traced a mysterious phone number. Could this be a 3rd suspect? And who is this David Ryan? And how is he connected to Diana?
So as part of the police investigation, the officers went to David Ryan's house in Hale in Greater Manchester. They asked him how he knew Diana. He said in 2010 he had met her at a dancing club in nearby Bowden. He said that he had not met her since, and that was the only occasion when he had seen her.
He gives an account that he knew the lady, not well, but he knew her. He met her about 2 years ago at a local dance club, and that was it really, nothing intimate, that he just knew her as a fleeting acquaintance, and that's all he gave to the police.
At this point, officers took a DNA swab of his mouth just to eliminate him from their inquiries.
Despite this latest lead, police still have no suspect. So detectives start looking deeper into Diana's digital footprint.
One of the things they looked at was her financial transactions, and it was noted that were large sums of money missing or that couldn't be traced.
And officers at Cheshire Police found a substantial amount of money that had been withdrawn by Diana, I think circa £60,000, whereby they had no idea where that money had gone. Straight away, that gave them the lead in terms of trying to find out who that money had gone to.
The large withdrawals ring alarm bells for detectives, and there is no sign of where or who the money was transferred to. But with the investigation intensifying, suddenly police make an announcement.
A 47-year-old man has been arrested in connection with the murder of a Cranage businesswoman.
As the inquiry progressed on the 2nd of September, the police announced to the media that they've arrested a suspect for the murder of Diana Lee.
The man who was arrested is David Ryan, the man who Diana met at the dancing club in Bowden first in 2010.
It was a bit of a shock to us all, really.
It had only been 24 hours since David told detectives he had met Diana once. So how had he ended up in police custody?
The day after Mr. Ryan had been spoken to by the police and given his DNA sample, he called the police and said that he had further information, that he did know the victim, that he'd met the victim the night before the murder, and he'd had consensual sex in her car with him. So Mr. Ryan said that he was in a relationship with this lady. He'd been for some time. He'd done work at the house. He had a conservatory window glazing company that he'd done a lot of work at the house.
But why would David change his alibi?
There are lots of reasons why somebody would keep a relationship secret. Now, one of the reasons is that that person is in a marriage. No, things need to be kept quiet.
Clearly, his mind had been worrying about the DNA, that they'd taken the DNA sample, and that he would be linked to the victims. So what he's done is he's tried to say that we would find his DNA once it had been examined, that he'd had sex with the day before, that he knew her and he had sex with her in the car. But it doesn't automatically say that he's murdered her, but his DNA would be found on her.
Detectives acknowledge David's concern that his DNA would most likely be picked up on Diana from the night before. But they still need to rule him out as a suspect.
So the police will be doing a lot of work around this new suspect whilst he's in custody, of his background. The background showed that he was a failed businessman. He spent lots of money. He liked spending money. He was buying stuff, exotic items for himself, for his family. And that shows the sort of mentality of the individual. And then that clearly links to the problems financially. He was bankrupt, business-wise.
They found he was in a huge amount of debt. His business, which was a window and door conservatory business, had collapsed in June 2012. It was quite clear that he was struggling for money.
David's money issues raised suspicion. On one hand, he was bankrupt. On the other, he was spending large amounts. And he'd been in a secret relationship with Diana, whose own bank accounts recently showed large amounts of money vanishing.
Throughout that, there was instances of spending which didn't tally with what he had.
So you're building the picture of someone who's will probably go to any means to try and support himself financially, not do the basics in life of working hard and getting money, but to get it quickly.
Intense investigations into both Diana and David's financial transactions ensue, and it isn't long before a link is made.
The next stage was finding out that David Ryan had basically tricked Diana into investing tens of thousands of pounds of her own money into companies that just didn't exist. This has gone on for a period of time, and Diana had committed a large amount of money into these fake schemes.
Clearly, the victim was vulnerable in some respects, struck up a relationship with the offender. He would have thought probably she was a wealthy lady, she had money, he was in financial troubles, his business was going downhill, he owed money out, and she was probably a target for Mr. Ryan to take advantage of financially.
Forensic evidence is then uncovered, which appears to place David at the scene of the crime.
There was a footprint found at the scene of the murder in the victim's blood, so that would suggest and confirm that whoever was wearing that footwear was at the scene after the victim had been killed. And that footwear was the offender's footwear, Mr. Ryan, and the forensic evidence supported the fact that it was his footwear and couldn't have been no one else's.
And it appears David Ryan has been following the case closely.
Computer analysis of his computers at his house and his phone, and it was quite compelling evidence, circumstantially, that he'd been searching on Cheshire Police website about the murder, where the inquiry was up to.
Perhaps even aware time was running out.
Background checks by officers into Ryan's computer's history found that he'd searched for countries that had no extradition treaties with the UK.
Somalia was named, and a number of others. So clearly this is a man who wants to, or is thinking about leaving the country because he's done something wrong. This man is now trying a way out to disappear from the country, to get away from being arrested for this awful murder.
Police appear to have finally found their man. And by collating all their information on David, they pieced together a timeline of a murder.
Diana had obviously left the Man's End restaurant in King Street in Knutsford.
And they know that her car was caught by the ANPR cameras driving away from her home.
From there, she'd gone to Hale in Manchester to see David Ryan in her car. She picked him up. They travelled back down to Cranage, whereby they spent the night. And then, obviously, in the early hours of the morning, for whatever happened and whatever reasons, Diana was murdered.
Having killed the person he's been having an affair with for almost 2 years, David then sets a scene.
So following the murder, Mr. Ryan decided to cover his tracks, planting evidence in the lodger's room, using a dagger, leaving it there that he'd used to commit the crime. He'd also then started to plant various fires around the house.
He tried to burn the body to try and get rid of forensic evidence.
The problem being that he found that where he'd started those fires, there wasn't enough oxygen for the fires to let hold. The fires just burnt themselves out, so they didn't have the effect that he wanted to. His plan, quite clearly, was to destroy the whole property, to make sure nothing was left, to make sure no evidence was left behind, so nothing could be traced back to him.
This was all about him getting away with it. This is about him walking away and leaving whatever behind him. This wasn't about anger. This wasn't about passion. This was, how do I get out of this? And can you imagine using that amount of violence just to get out of something?
The police had sufficient evidence to go to the CPS to charge Mr. Ryan with murder.
But what really went on that fateful morning? And what may have driven David to murder Diana?
The trial of a man from the Altrincham area accused of killing a Cranage businesswoman has begun. Diana Lee, who was 54, was found dead after a fire at her home last August.
It's been 10 months since Diana Lee was found murdered in her home in Cranage. And 48-year-old David Ryan faces trial for her murder at Chester Crown Court.
Heading into the trial for this crime, I would clearly be concerned of all the evidence we've got. Have we got sufficient evidence to convict him beyond all reasonable doubt for a jury to believe the prosecution case and it's watertight? The last thing you want to do is go to a trial and there be some error or some process we haven't done. The continuity evidence has been missed somewhere and it be brought up at a Crown Court trial.
Local reporter James Wilson recalls seeing Diana's killer in the flesh.
On the first day of the trial, it was a bit of a surprise to myself to see Mr. Ryan stood there. He probably wasn't what you would describe as a person who probably capable of committing this crime, essentially. He wasn't very big, looked quite meek, and he was obviously incredibly nervous as the proceedings were about to begin.
The prosecution begins by setting out its case to the jury.
The prosecution outlined a really strong case in their opening statement. They detailed where the DNA had been found in the property, including the bedroom and other parts of the house. Quite a lot was backed up by phone records and evidence of the ANPR cameras around the area. It was an incredibly strong case and probably quite surprising that Mr. Ryan at this point was still pleading not guilty.
The prosecution reveals to the court how David first responded to police.
I think police officers were quite taken aback by Ryan's reaction to the request for a DNA swab. He wasn't happy, he became quite agitated, and he suggested he didn't want to do it. It was only after persuasion by the officers involved that mouth swab was completed.
The prosecution reveals further evidence in relation to a text Diana sent.
The police searched details on her mobile phone records. They found out that text messages had been sent in the morning to her close friends saying she'd been unwell.
A simple text message, but one which immediately flagged suspicion among investigators. The text was sent early on the morning of 9th of August, when Diana was already dead.
An expert gave evidence at the trial to say that was unlikely to be the victim's text message by the language used in the text message. So sometimes we will use different experts in certain fields, and this expert would say that it wasn't the normal language used by the victim, but more likely to be used by the offender.
A linguistics expert tells the court that the style of the text message did not match Diana's typical style, but it did match David Ryan's. Despite hearing evidence linking David Ryan to the murder, the court hears he has no previous convictions. So what would lead him to commit such an atrocious crime? But as the trial unfolds, more information comes to light, hinting at a potential motive.
Obviously living in Hale, it's a very affluent suburb of Greater Manchester. Maybe from his point of view there was a pressure to keep that up. Maybe there was a pressure to keep up that pretense that he just couldn't do anymore.
This man was in financial dire straits. Now, that is one of the triggers that can cause big problems in a relationship. He may have feared that his wife was going to leave him because of these enormous debts. He may have gone out and looked for someone like Diana to be able to get some money to fix the other situation. I think he targeted Diana for money, and the reason I think that is because he spent all the money on his wife. He spent all the money on IVF treatments, on holidays, on things for his other family. He did not get invested in his relationship with Diana. So, no, I don't think he was in love with her.
He'd already taken a substantial amount of money from Diana on the premise of investing in things that just didn't exist.
But as it transpired, the deeper he got in, that was actually becoming a bigger threat to the other situation than perhaps even the finances were in the beginning.
Somewhere along the line, this man is living a lie. He's married, he's got a child, he's been in another relationship with someone secretly, and unfortunately, all these things come to an end somewhere along the line. And in these circumstances, I would have thought in relation to the victim, she's gone to his house the night before the murder. She's collected him in her car, brought him back to her house.
Diana started asking questions about the investment. You know, the money that she'd given him, where was it? How was it doing? Was she going to get any back? She wasn't a rich woman. She couldn't just chuck this money away and think, oh, well, you win some, you lose some. And I think that he was under increasing pressure from her.
She was going to possibly tell someone, tell their wife, or go to the police to say, he's targeted me.
So was David trying to protect his wife from finding out about his affair and his conning Diana out of money?
And there's a stage where there's a trigger. He was more worried about his wife finding out and her maybe leaving him. He wants to protect the relationship with his wife, but we can't simplistically say that that is because he's so in love with his wife. It is far more likely that he gets his entire identity from the relationship he has with his wife. And if you took that away from him, you'd be taking everything.
After a grueling 7-week trial at Chester Crown Court, the jury returns its verdict. David Ryan is found guilty of Diana Lee's murder.
Conman David Ryan killed his wealthy lover after cheating her out of £60,000. Today, a jury in Chester found him guilty of murder.
He is sentenced to 34 years in prison.
There were shouts from the gallery from people connected to Diana who were obviously incredibly emotional at that time, hearing what they wanted to hear. Mr. Ryan was again pretty much motionless throughout this reading. There was no real reaction from him. I think probably he expected this verdict to come out, and again, he probably wasn't surprised deep down because he knew that he'd done this incredibly bad crime.
I think the most awful thing about this case is how dispensable Diana was to him. We all know she's a really, really lovely person. There's the lodger, who he doesn't know very well, but he's quite happy for both of those people to take the fall to protect his life. He has no empathy with their suffering or what's going to happen to them.
With David now behind bars, the local community look back and think why Diana, a successful and popular business owner, might have let a criminal into her life.
Diana didn't behave strangely when she gave the money to Ryan. She behaved in a way that any of us would have behaved in similar circumstances with the same information. She didn't hand over money to a person who she thought was dodgy or that she didn't like. She was taken in by him. She may have been lonely. She cared about him. She trusted him. We give money to people we trust. She wasn't a stupid woman. In hindsight, or from where we're sitting, we can say, I would never have done that. Well, I guarantee you, if you felt the way that she did, you might well have done.
It's just worrying, really, what can happen to you. And obviously happened to Diana, which is such a shame, because she was such a lovely lady.
Still in everybody's minds, still can't believe what's happened. It's just a tragedy.
For the residents of Cranage, she will never be forgotten.
We're Kent-bound as the experts fight an unseen enemy. Follow the action right from the beginning as new Cobra Cyber War starts. Thursday at 9.
This is an emergency. I've just walked in and found my mother's body lying there, uncompletely dead.
It was fairly obvious this was going to be a big story.
We've spent millions of pounds on this investigation, the most expensive investigations that Hampshire Police have ever run.
That type of thing doesn't happen around here. Why was this little old lady killed?
This is a murder.
Nestled beside the River Itchen sits the pretty hamlet of Brambridge.
Brambridge is typical of these tiny little hamlets that have got very, very few homes there. Everyone really knows everyone. It's a very friendly kind of place, and you've got your little store, and all community life is around those areas. It attracts a lot of visitors simply because of the River Itchen. There are lovely walks along the river there. Again, one of the most beautiful spots in England. Brambridge is most definitely one of the loveliest.
This picturesque part of Hampshire often attracts a slower pace of life.
It was always predominantly sort of an elder generation place, so people around here were sort of over 50s, 60s.
The community is an aged community. It's not an awful lot of very young people. There are some young people, of course, homes with kids and so on, but the majority of the community is older people.
The Hampshire Hogs, as they're known, they're very proud of their area. The local people who have been here for generations. And, yeah, like everywhere where it's village life, it's lovely.
At the very edge of Brambridge lived a wealthy 77-year-old grandmother, Georgina Edmonds.
Everything that was said about Georgina Edmonds was just a lovely, lovely lady. Well-liked and loved by everyone that knew her, very close to her family, very friendly, and just a charming old lady.
She had grandchildren that she really enjoyed playing with, was always up for a bit of a laugh. Her grandson was a budding filmmaker, and he would make funny little videos at Christmas, and Georgina would star in those as well. And she enjoyed life. You know, she was still very independent. She was still mobile. She drove her car. She would go down to the shops, but she had assistance with that as well.
Well, I knew her because one of the jobs I did at work was, to take the groceries to the dear old souls who couldn't get around. I know she always had her little dogs with her. Rather sweet little things. Very, very friendly. They used to stand up at the window and look out of the window. She was a delightful person, and nothing to say about her that wasn't nice.
Georgina lived in a large gated estate on the edge of the river.
The Edmonds family were well known in the area. It was Georgina's husband who had founded the family business importing coffee.
Very well-to-do family. Harry, her son, worked in London. The business, I believe, was in Basingstoke. But again, most of the time, they were up in London working hard and would come back to Hampshire at weekends, for rest.
When Georgina's husband sadly passed away, she downsized into the smaller house on the estate.
She moved into the cottage, which is your chocolate box cover cottage itself.
Nice little house, amongst the trees, by the river.
Her son, Harry, took over running the business and moved into the larger house, as you would when you reach an older age. You don't want the bother of all the dusting.
Georgina seemed happy in her new home. But in January 2008, life in the community changes forever.
Police emergency.
This is an emergency. I've just come down to my house. My mother has a cottage 100 yards away.
Right.
I've got no reply from her. I've come in through her bedroom window, which was unlocked. She's lying on the floor in the kitchen, and it looks to me as if she's been hit over the head. She looks as if she's dead.
Okay, calm down for me, sir. What's your name?
My name is Harry Edmonds. I'm her son. I've just walked in. I came in through the window and I found the house in complete darkness. I've gone through into the kitchen and found my mother's body lying there, and I've been out walking her dog. This looks like a crime scene to me.
Okay, well, try not to touch anything for me.
This is a murder.
Okay, just calm down for me, sir. I'll send someone else for you, okay?
Yeah, please, as soon as possible. I'm sick, she's dead. That's a murder.
It was about 6:15. I was at home, just prepping dinner, and my phone rang, and so I answered the phone, and they said, we've got a suspicious death. I said, okay, tell me about that. And they said, it's an elderly woman been found dead in the kitchen, face down by her son. So I jumped in the car, and it was a miserable, wet, cold January night, blowing a gale, driving through these country roads as we are now.
Paul Barton, Detective Chief Inspector at the time, arrives at Georgina's address, which is already swarmed with a significant police presence.
So just as I'm pulling down here, I can see the blue lights sort of flashing in the pitch black. So I know I'm getting close to it. And then I just come around the bend and there's some more police activity. A police van and a police car, an ambulance, and some tape here, just across the bridge here. So I just pull in where I'm pulling in now, actually. I walked up the drive. It's a short walk up a gravel drive into the cottage. The kitchen door is on the side of the cottage. I just looked in, I could see, sadly, Georgina was lying there face down with a large amount of blood around her, some stab wounds to her neck. So I was satisfied at that point that we did have something that was a suspicious death.
A murder investigation is launched, and police maintain a secure perimeter in and around Georgina's home.
You only get one go at recovering evidence from a body, and one that is already compromised. There will be a lot of discussion about what should be sampled at the scene, what should be done at the scene, what is going to be compromised by another action. So there will be a lot of effort going into preserving as much evidence as possible.
I actually want this road completely closed. And it's one entrance in, one entrance out, but I didn't want anyone else coming across here, and I certainly didn't want the press turning up and having a look. And so immediately what we call a wider cordon was put on, and we blocked the road so that we had complete control of the area.
That morning, we went out for a walk, and as we crossed the road where it leads to her house, there was a policeman standing there. There was a car, the road was blocked. And I said, can you tell me what's happening on this road? There's been a murder.
When the news broke, it was fairly obvious from the beginning that this was going to be a big story. Neighbours would phone the newsroom and say, can you tell us anything about what's going on?
Everybody was talking about it, wherever you went, everybody in all the shops. And there were police everywhere, and you just wouldn't generally see police presence in that area.
The 15 years that we've been here, we haven't seen or we haven't heard of a murder, except for this one. This is the first one.
I think that was quite worrying, because, why? Why was this little old lady killed? What was the reason? So it just seemed very, very random and horrible.
It became very obvious very quickly that this was a murder hunt that was out of the ordinary, shall we say.
So what led to a murder in this peaceful village? And why would someone want to kill a well-loved member of the community?
Police emergency.
This is an emergency. I've just walked into the kitchen and found my mother's body lying there. This looks like a crime scene to me. This is a murder.
In the picturesque village of Brambridge, the close-knit community has woken up to the news that a much-loved 77-year-old grandmother, Georgina Edmonds, has been brutally murdered in her home.
It's extremely grim. My mum was 77 at the time and living with us, you know, not very far away. So, yeah, you don't even want to think about it.
It's gone from being a quiet village scenario to then being sort of on the local news, everybody talking about it, what's happened, you know. That type of thing doesn't happen around here.
With a small community in fear of a killer in their midst, it's down to DCI Paul Barton to address the public.
A Saturday morning I was doing my first media briefing and it was packed, you know, and it was Sky News Live, BBC Live, it was headline news, you know, it was Midsummer Murders, kind of 77-year-old lady murdered brutally. So the nation were interested and the media were interested.
Under a national media spotlight, Hampshire police are under pressure to work out who would kill Georgina Edmonds and why.
I just start sort of kicking into autopilot. The next thing I'm thinking is, well, who's done this? Who's responsible? Any suspicious incident calls in that area in the last 24 hours? Has the victim been a victim of any other crimes? Is there any sort of domestic violence within the household? What do we know about the rest of the family? What do we know about the neighbours?
Was this a stranger murder? Was this someone, though, that she knew? And in such a small village, how did they get in and out of the cottage without being seen?
With a killer on the loose, the finger of suspicion is on every member of the community.
Everybody asking questions. We had so many people come in the pub at the time. You know, did you hear anything? Did you see anything? Do you know who it was? You know.
We go out as the media and knock on doors and try to talk to people and find people that would have known her. When you've only got 5 homes to actually knock on the door, the community, they'll be in shock themselves, actually, about it.
With Georgina's son Harry too distraught to speak, it was left to neighbours to speculate what had happened. Had someone targeted her because of her wealth?
They had a beautiful house, they had quite a bit of money in the family. And I just remember that, you know, the money, the big house, the jewellery. It was in a dark, secluded area.
There was nothing else there. There was another house, I think, to the right, I seem to remember. But that's it. She was on her own.
Police conduct a thorough search of Georgina's house for clues.
We were exploring what could have happened. Was it burglary that was the motive? Her credit card had been taken. I believe also a Radley handbag was gone. I think a laptop was gone. But there were other items that were there in the kitchen that were quite valuable. There was money out, I believe, that were just left. And that seemed rather strange, that this was a burglary that had gone wrong, that the burglar hadn't taken those fairly obvious items that were there.
Police take a closer look at the crime scene, and one significant thing jumps out. There's no sign of a forced entry.
Was this a cover-up? Was it another motive? And so, therefore, had she been targeted in some other way, and it was a pretend burglary, taking just a few things, when a real burglar would have taken lots of things.
With no sign of a break-in, everyone known to Georgina is under suspicion. Could the local community offer clues as to who Georgina may have let into the house?
Trusting. You couldn't have had anyone more trusting. She was that sort of person. She never disputed things, you know, she just trusted people. And sometimes people are a bit suspicious, but she wasn't that type of person.
She was the sort of person, and I guess this is of her age, that would keep her door unlocked. You know, she would talk to strangers. If someone knocked on the door and asked for directions, she wouldn't be suspicious. Probably even offer them a cup of tea and, you know, spend time with people.
With no obvious break-in, detectives are left to speculate whether this was a random attack by a stranger or by someone closer to home.
Quite often, the last person to see the person alive could be the killer. And it is odd that a son comes home and finds their mum dead in a kitchen. I've dealt with other jobs where children have killed parents. You know, they may have been off their face on drink or drugs. There may have been a domestic argument that's then gone too far. He could have had an axe to grind with his mother, and he could have killed his mother, and then he's just made up that he's come in and found her dead.
Police reanalyse the 999 call made by Georgina's son, Harry.
I've just walked in and found my mother's body lying there. This looks like a crime scene to me. This is a murder.
It's a strange call, I have to say. He's very calm, but he says she's dead. I think it's a murder, he says. And I remember, you know, we played that time and time again, and it's gone out in the media as well. And, you know, a lot of people thought that was strange.
Police bring Harry in for questioning to establish his movements in the hours his mother was murdered. He tells detectives he was at work all day and did not return home till 6 p.m.
He was concerned because he hadn't heard from his mother all day, and I think he'd been trying to call her. And he went to the cottage and it was in darkness. Harry's managed to force open the ground floor window, I think into Georgina's bedroom. He climbs in, goes into the kitchen and finds Georgina lifeless on the floor in a pool of blood.
Harry's story is quickly verified. Police are still no closer to establishing who had gained access to Georgina's home. So they release CCTV footage of Georgina the day before her death, which shows her holding a handbag, which is now missing, and urge the public for help.
To be honest, most people were pretty appalled anyway, just the fact that an old lady had been murdered without knowing the detail. And generally, everyone was trying to be as helpful as they possibly could.
It was a huge community thing, and they had big things in the village hall. So everyone got together, they all went out searching. Everybody was sort of part of it. Everybody searched, everyone went and looked, and yeah, all together really as a community.
Despite the community's best efforts, Georgina's handbag isn't found. But post-mortem results help police identify the cause of death. Could this lead to clues as to her attacker?
On one level, the death of Georgina Edmonds pathologically is straightforward. She has been struck on the head with a heavy blunt object. Ultimately, it was identified that that was a marble rolling pin. A heavy weapon, a good sort of thing to use to cause damage. But on top of that, you then have the incised wounds, the cuts to the body, inflicted with a degree of deliberation. And you don't really have defensive type injuries. One conclusion that could reasonably be drawn is that if they're not in a place where they are likely to kill you, that they are an act of torture. There is an attempt to distress somebody and extract information.
Police now believe Georgina was tortured before she died.
It was horrific.
Terrible.
And as more details came out about what the guy had done to her, apparently tortured her, I mean, it got worse and worse.
Eventually, it emerged just the horrible scale of the injuries to Georgina that were allied to trying to find out her PIN number for her credit card.
We established about 5 hours after discovering her body that somebody had attempted to use that Cashpoint card at a local ATM. And we feel that they were trying to get the PIN number out of Georgina.
Police trace CCTV from that local Tesco ATM in nearby Eastleigh, only half a mile away from the murder scene, and see someone attempting to take money out.
They attempted to use the machine a couple of times. I think it swallowed up the card and off it went. So we didn't have a facial image of the person using the ATM machine, but we were confident to say it was a man. And in particular, the user of the ATM machine was wearing a thick fluorescent jacket with a hood up. And the person that approached that clearly knew that that camera was there because they took all reasonable steps to avoid being seen, keeping their head down, keeping the hood up, etc.
Despite his face being hidden, detectives now have an image of Georgina's killer, and the search for this person intensifies.
This is probably someone who was local or had local connections with Eastleigh. Have we had any offenders that have been released from prison recently in that area on licence? Have we got any registered sex offenders or violent offenders that are in that area? Luckily for me, the duty detective sergeant happened to know that there was a bail hostel called Elderfield House, which was pretty much at the end of the road from Brambridge leading into Otterbourne Village. It's the sort of place that you wouldn't expect to find in an affluent village like Otterbourne or Brambridge, and there are some unpleasant people there.
Behind those trees is Elderfield.
You can just see the rooftop over there.
These are people that had done time in prison, and after their term was over, they sent them here.
It was a halfway house, basically.
It's a halfway house.
It was somewhere where they could sort of spend time and sort of rehabilitate and get back into normal life. And they would hang around in groups and get very drunk. And it was not nice. It was quite a bit unsettling.
It is of some concern in that you don't know what's going to happen next.
You would often get some of them escape, or they would then get out and they aren't supposed to be out. Danger, I guess it was described as.
Police question the residents of Elderfield to establish their movements on the night of Georgina's murder.
There were 4 people that were unaccounted for that night. I think 3 had come back late. Within 24 hours or so, we declared 4 people as suspects from Elderfield House. And we arrested them, searched their rooms, brought them back to the police station, forensically examined them, and then put them through the interview process.
After hours of questioning, it soon becomes clear to detectives that 3 of the suspects had clear alibis and are released without charge. But the 4th did not return to Elderfield for 24 hours during the night Georgina was murdered. And his clothing is of particular interest to police.
CCTV showed this fluorescent jacket, which was really key. And in our search in Elderfield House, we established that one of the residents who was unaccounted for on the night was wearing a big fluorescent jacket. He had previous convictions for murder or manslaughter. And so he was of particular interest and excitement to the team at that time.
But police are able to verify the 4th man's alibi, and he is released without charge. And with no suspect or clear motive, fear begins to escalate across the local community.
It's unsettling. It's unknown because the police don't tell you exactly what's happening, especially when they say, well, we haven't found him yet, we're still looking out for him, So where is he?
It was quite scary. My family were saying to me, don't go out on your own at night, don't go out to the car park on your own. It definitely makes you change the way you behave, the way you think. For ages, people didn't go to the garden centre. That was really affected by the whole situation, because I just think people thought it was a dangerous area to go to, so they didn't go there.
They were getting more and more concerned and worried that this is someone still here then, is it? Are we to believe that this is a stranger or someone that was passing through, just happened to pick the cottage, just happened to find that the door was open, going there, carry out this terrible crime, and then just drive away and leave the area utterly and completely, and that's it? Or is it more likely that the perpetrator is still here amongst us?
It's been 1 month since much-loved grandma, Georgina Edmonds, was found murdered in her home in Brambridge, and police are yet to charge anyone for the heinous crime.
It was in the media daily, you know, any newspaper stat you saw it. It was on the news, it was on the radio. We had boards up everywhere, and if you lived in the area as well, you couldn't miss it. Everyone knew what was going on.
I think at the time there was an urgency to get this one done, to get it sorted.
The only sighting detectives have is by a Tesco ATM machine in nearby Eastleigh. And so the investigation to find this man spotted on CCTV escalates.
We knew that Georgina's card had been attempted to be used. Then obviously that, for me, becomes an area of concentration for house to house. So we had police patrols in the area, certainly at the Tesco Express. We wanted to capture anyone that was there at the material time. So we obviously pulled the CCTV from the petrol station itself. We could read all the registration numbers of the cars coming in. And then we had the obvious houses sort of adjacent to Tesco Express and then right opposite. And so I decided that we would focus house to house in that area as well, knocking on doors. Again, good old-fashioned detective work.
And it isn't long before one address catches police attention.
There was a raid on a house that wasn't far from where the cash point had been, where the person in the frame had been using the debit card.
There was a particular address not a million miles away from the ATM machine where a man lived up until the point of around about the 11th of January and then disappeared. The inquiries that we did identified that he was Polish and had gone back to Poland. And he may have also had some previous convictions, so I sent a team out to Poland.
Suddenly, the news story goes international.
We had reports that the police had actually gone out to Poland to carry out inquiries.
There was a lot of media interest in this particular case, and then the media were descending on us, and they would put two and two together and come up with murderer, fled to Poland and all this. You know, got the community kind of excited, if you like, because they were thinking, oh, great, they finally caught that person.
Police question the Polish man regarding his movements on the night Georgina was murdered. Have they finally found their killer?
He was alibied, and also, I think, through DNA as well, we were able to eliminate him from the inquiry.
With the Polish man in the clear, Hampshire police are back in the UK and back to square one. So they release a clearer version of the CCTV footage to the public and suspect the person is a male aged between 16 and 60 with an estimated height of 5'11". The hunt for this man accelerates to new levels.
We wanted DNA swabs from males matching that description to come forward. Our view was, if you've got nothing to hide, come forward.
You can't force people to do that kind of thing. But what this did, of course, was to add to the suspicion in the community. But they would have come forward because feeling, well, if I don't, then suspicion's going to fall on me. I must admit that, in my experience, I've never come across a mass DNA appeal anywhere that I've worked before. It was certainly turning into something that's, well, a modern-day thriller.
More than 2,000 local men have their DNA swabbed, but there are no immediate results, and the case goes cold. Two and a half years later, and Georgina's killer is still at large. But on the 30th of June, 2010, things take a dramatic turn. An arrest is made. And it's a local man. 31-year-old Matthew Hamlin.
We scrambled to find out who this man is. He's got a history of violence, and he's not a nice guy to know.
Matthew Hamlin was known to police. He'd been known for drug usage and also violence in the past. He had a off-on relationship with a local girl. In fact, he'd had an argument with her and resulted hitting her with an ironing board, and she moved out of the home. He had quite a bad drug habit at that time, using cocaine, and we understand he also racked up numerous debts as a result of his drug usage. And so that kind of fitted the profile of somebody high on drugs, desperate, and probably not really thinking what they're doing.
You can understand that the police would be interested in him. He used to walk his dog along the riverbank there and would know the area quite well. So he fitted in one of the profiles, shall we say, for the police.
But what exactly led to Matthew's arrest?
One particularly interesting subject came to them with a couple of bits of evidence. The first was that despite he denying that he had been in the area on that particular day and time, his phone records were showing that he actually was there.
This person had a mobile phone, and what we could show was that their phone was bouncing off the same cell mast on the afternoon of the 11th of January.
With Hamlin in custody, police waste no time in recording his every word when his mum visits.
The other thing is I might have an alibi for it as well.
What do you mean?
When they first interviewed me, I ain't got a clue where I was. And Sarah got out her diary and she flipped through, looked at the date, and she said, yeah, you was with me.
I can speak to Sarah.
Yeah. See if she's still going to make that.
I think she was trying to be helpful for him. And I guess, you know, if you think about it, you don't want to think your child is responsible for doing such a grave crime. And so I would imagine she was desperate.
But I haven't spoken to them for ages. I haven't fallen out of them, but I ain't spoken to them. So if she's still going to say that or not, but I can't remember it. I was off my head all the time. I was drunk. I don't know what I was doing. I don't know where I was 2.5 years ago. I struggled where I was last week.
It was quite clear in that recording that he was trying to manufacture an alibi at that time that would take him out of the area at the material time when Georgina was murdered.
As well as Hamlin's mobile phone pinging on a nearby mast, linking him to the scene, new evidence comes to light, which police believe is even more conclusive.
The other bit was partial DNA that was found on the rolling pin, and also, I believe, on a small part of her clothing. That was a partial match to this particular subject. Putting the two together, and he came right to the top.
Eventually, the scientists were able to show some components of that mixed profile were 2,600 times more likely to be attributable to Matthew Hamlin. We were fairly confident that Hamlin was responsible.
After a manhunt that lasted years, it seems police have finally found their man. And Matthew Hamlin is charged with Georgina's murder. Matthew pleads not guilty, and 10 months later, the trial begins at Winchester Crown Court.
You're nervous, you're excited, you've got the victim's family up in the gallery, your QC opens up the case, you hear what's being said, and you sit back and think, that sounds pretty good. You know, if I'm on the jury, I'd be thinking, guilty.
The prosecution lay out a mountain of evidence against Matthew Hamlin. And after a 3-month trial, the jury returns with its verdict.
When the call came through, I remember the news desk saying to me, it's not guilty. At that moment, it was one of those moments in the newsroom where you get that stunned silence.
They don't happen that often. So when they do, and when it's such an important case like that, you can't really describe it. It's just a punch in the guts, you know. Yes, professionally, you're disappointed for yourself, you know, and your team, but it's the family, you know, you really feel for. And, you know, you do question, could we have done more, you know? Did we have the wrong person, you know? Is there somebody out there that's done this that we haven't caught?
And you think about the community. The community had lived with this for 4 years. They believed that the monster amongst them had been caught and was now going to get his just desserts. And now it wasn't. And according to the court, he's not the monster at all. Well, who is the monster?
Despite a 2.5-year manhunt and becoming Hampshire Constabulary's most expansive investigation, Matthew Hamlin has been acquitted of Georgina Edmonds' murder, leaving her family, the community and the police feeling devastated and in shock.
Well, we're back now to square one. The mystery continues. The courts have cleared him. So who is it? Is it my neighbour? Is it my friend? Is it someone in my family? Is it someone I work with?
You always have to be open-minded, and you have to accept that actually Hamlin didn't do it and there is someone else out there.
With the case unsolved, the possibility of the killer getting away with murder looms over police.
Are the police looking for anyone else? Is the case closed? And the police were quite adamant that the case remained open, that they were carrying on their investigations.
So obviously we have a debrief. We'll meet with counsel as well. We'll speak with the family. We will conduct a review of that investigation to see if there were anything we missed, anything we could have done, mainly because so lessons can be learned, because once somebody's been acquitted, that's it.
Detectives go back to the drawing board and relook at all the evidence they have collated over the years and examine what went wrong.
We spent millions of pounds on this investigation, the most expensive investigations that Hampshire police have ever run, and the forensic budget was through the roof.
Beforehand, they had looked for his DNA on the marble rolling pin, but graphically there was so much of Georgina Edmonds' blood on that blurred everything, and they got just a partial sample. And then from another small part of her clothing, where again it was a partial sample. I mean, you're asking a jury to put someone away for life on the grounds of circumstantial evidence and also partial DNA. It's too cloudy, and I think juries can then look at it and say, can I actually send a man away for life on evidence here which is not the strongest?
Police spend years looking for new techniques to forensically identify a killer. And they eventually come across a recent form of DNA testing called YSTR, which extracts the male DNA profile from a full DNA profile.
It's a simple process, and it's almost sellotape on clothing and points of the body to remove skin cells. So it's fairly early on in the exhibits that we've taken of the left sleeve of Georgina's blouse, which would have had skin cells on there. And so the decision was taken to look at those skin cells and examine them, because we hadn't done so far. We'd done the waistband, but not the sleeve. And then obviously it went for analysis, number crunching, etc. And it came back with a full male profile.
On Thursday, 30th of October 2014, police make an announcement. They have arrested and charged a suspect for the murder of Georgina Edmonds. As a new trial looms, people want to know, who is in the frame? None other than Matthew Hamlin.
This is incredible. They're going to put him back on trial. It wouldn't have been allowed because double jeopardy meant you could not be tried for the same crime in this country that had only been changed a few years prior to that, which enabled this to actually happen.
Despite the double jeopardy rules changing in 2003 and a new stack of DNA evidence, how did detectives manage to get Hamlin's charge over the line?
It's not an easy thing to do for obvious reasons. The defence argued that it's not new evidence, you had it all along, you just chose not to examine it and find it. But actually, it's not evidence until you've actually turned it into evidence. And that was the ruling of Sir Brian Leveson, who heard that at the Court of Appeal, who then quashed the acquittal, and we were able to then go for a retrial.
January 2016, exactly 8 years after Georgina's murder, the second trial of Matthew Hamlin begins at Winchester Crown Court. The prosecution lay out all their evidence once again, including their new secret weapon, the YSTR DNA technique.
We're hoping for a better outcome this time.
It's 1 in 26 million, that DNA, that it's not him.
And when you describe that, you know, there's 26 million to 1 is this person, I think it was a fairly easy decision for the jury to make. Layered on top of that was, obviously, he was a local person, violent background, and obviously the phone was bouncing off the mast at the time.
Despite presenting their new evidence in court, there are many in the community who are unconvinced that Matthew Hamlin is the killer. At the time of the second trial, Matthew is a changed man, leaving behind his days of drug taking, working full-time as an electrician and raising his family. And after a grueling 6-week trial, the jury retires to consider the verdict.
When you do get to court and the prosecution and the defence have had their say and the judge has summed up, you still get a bit nervous, even though you just know in your heart of hearts that it's a really, really strong case.
So we can't speculate, we can't talk to people about, well, you know, what do you think this time? Do you think he's going to get off a second time?
On the 23rd of February 2016, the jury return with a verdict.
8 years after Georgina Edmonds, aged 77 years, was found dead at her home in Bambridge, Matthew Hamlin has today been found guilty of her brutal murder.
It was just a sense of relief and just great work, and so many people, bear in mind this investigation had gone on for years really, and so many people have got involved in that investigation. But it was just such a nice feeling.
Throughout this entire investigation, we have been absolutely determined to prove beyond reasonable doubt who committed this horrific crime. After the discovery of new evidence and presenting it to the Court of Appeal, we were able to try Matthew Hamlin again for the murder of Georgina Edmonds. The whole prosecution team were determined to find justice for Georgina, and today that has been achieved.
Being stood there, listening to Harry address the media and just say some really nice words about me and my colleagues and Hampshire Police and all the work that we've done to get justice for the family. So yeah, just a great feeling.
The entire team of police officers, police staff, prosecution barristers, forensic scientists and colleagues from the Crown Prosecution Service have been absolutely dedicated to putting together the best possible case that could be put before the court and the jury. Every moment has been worth it to see justice finally served and the killer of Georgina Edmonds behind bars. Thank you.
With Matthew Hamlin finally behind bars, the question that still puzzles the community is why would he want to end the life of Georgina Edmonds so brutally, torturing her before battering her to death?
Who can say, and it's difficult for me to speculate. Well, we know now from the court case, although he's never admitted it, that he was short of money, that he had walked along the riverbank and he had found his way in the cottage, whether that was just by pure chance, whether he had seen her walking her dogs and had known that she was gone there and she was a vulnerable old lady. Sadly, whether he would have known or not, that the door was left open when he went in. He had tortured her to reveal the number for her debit card by stabbing her something like 27 times and then just leave her there, tie her up or something like that. But then it all got, who knows what it is, but I think what we can do.
Painful to hear. Some Bostonian people, they do feel afraid, they feel afraid going out. It just brings this grey shadow over your community.
As Marina has been senselessly attacked in her home for no apparent reason, the community is on high alert.
The people of Boston feared there was a killer at large.
It was scary. There was always that worry of somebody coming back. They could have potentially took more lives.
It isn't long before Marina's family and friends learn of the brutal attack on their loved one.
Someone texted me saying that The fire brigade and police was there, so she's been killed.
I was in shock. I couldn't believe. It was my birthday, so obviously from very high happiness I went in deep sadness and proper shock. I thought, what? Is that really possible?
With a murder investigation underway, police need to establish a timeline of Marina's last known movements.
There's all sorts of inquiries that need to be made. We would have people immediately looking for CCTV in the area. We'd have people very, very quickly knocking on doors to find out who's been seen in the area, who hasn't. We need to find out when this happened, because that's the starting point, isn't it? When was she last seen, and who was she last seen by? Also, where she worked, who she would normally work with, when should she have been in at work last?
Officers speak to Marina's colleagues at the fruit packing factory where she worked and narrow the time frame on her last known movements.
Police discovered Marina hadn't turned in for work 5 o'clock that morning. So clearly, whatever had happened before that time. And that's absolutely key part of the investigation.
Back at the scene, police and fire experts examine the cause of the fire and quickly establish it had been purposely set after Marina had died.
The early forensic evidence showed that a fire had been set in the flat, but it didn't take properly, so the house wasn't badly damaged by fire.
The fire didn't really take. I think it was just slow burning. But if they'd done a good job on the fire, it could have just took this whole block. That was scary.
With the fire having been set after the attack, detectives speculate whether Marina's killer had tried to destroy evidence at the scene.
They won't have known if they left any forensic evidence there. They won't have known if they left any fingerprints there. They won't have known for sure that someone didn't see them either going or coming back.
Forensic experts are called in. They need to examine the scene to find any clues that might point to Marina's attacker.
When we got there, it was obvious that I wasn't able to do my job. The reason I couldn't do it is because the fire that was started on the stairs had produced a certain excessive amount of soot throughout the flat. And the whole flat was covered in a thin layer of soot, which meant you couldn't see the blood. So at that point, after a brief look around, and we did locate some bloodstains, but it was obvious that the extent of that was much more than what we could see, we decided to go home and have a team of people come in and de-soot the scene, and then us to go back after that process has been done.
Forensics must wait until the thick layer of soot is meticulously cleared before they can work. But detectives do manage to question Marina's ex-husband, Gitas. He says he hasn't seen her, but reveals some information which leads investigators to look deeper into Marina's personal life. And they uncover some disturbing connections to some violent people.
Following the ending of a relationship with Gitas in 2015, she'd formed a new relationship. And it was quickly discovered that she had been involved in a very recent trial at Lincoln Crown Court. She had been charged with perverting the course of justice after her new partner was involved in a violent attack on another group of East Europeans.
The man in question is 42-year-old Alexander Kudryasov.
Alexander, he worked at the same factory as well. Alexander was involved in what's it called, criminal activity and deviant behaviors and everything. He's got quite a rough background.
Police found out that her new boyfriend had recently been sent to prison for 18 years for grievous bodily harm, dreadful attack involving knives, and Marina herself had been acquitted for conspiracy to avert the course of justice in providing him with an alibi. Only a matter of days before her body was found. Clearly, it was an obvious line of inquiry that her death might be something to do with those circumstances.
Police want to know, was Marina's involvement in a gang dispute anything to do with her death? Could this have been a revenge attack?
One theory that the police would have been exploring is that maybe one members of the group that were the victims would exact revenge on Marina's partner, and the fact that he'd been convicted and was now out the way meant that, of course, there was no one to protect Marina at the time.
Police explore the possibility Marina had become mixed up with a bad crowd through her relationship with Alexander. The theory of a revenge attack takes hold, and the safety of Marina's friends and family becomes a police priority.
The fact that a group of East European men have been very, very badly injured by another group of East European men, obviously down in Boston, there would have been tensions between the various people involved, the various families.
Clearly, one of the concerns for the police initially was the welfare of the child, and then the other family members as well.
As police make sure Marina's loved ones are kept safe, post-mortem results arrive which offer clues to her attacker.
Marina had suffered traumatic brain injury, and she had fractured eye sockets and other injuries.
We know that it wasn't a knife used. It could have been done with fists, kicking, or a blunt instrument.
It was clearly a very violent and cold-blooded killing.
And with the scene now cleared of soot from the fire, forensic results arrive, which further paints a horrific picture.
What we found was a large pool of blood in the living room with smears around it, and there were small spots of blood radiating from it, indicating that there's been impacts in that area, probably into Marina herself. I suspect that she's gone into the living room for whatever reason, been hit, gone down almost straight away, and then been assaulted on the floor by punching or kicking or with a blunt instrument.
Forensic results also show bloodied track marks from the living room to the bathroom.
The two track marks is where her heels were in contact with the ground as she's been dragged across the landing and into the bathroom. In the bathroom, there were spatters of blood around the bath and on the floor to indicate that she'd been further assaulted in that area. Her body was found naked in the bath. There was no blood-stained clothing, so when it happened, she was most likely naked. And the pathologist said that Maria had actually been drowned by having the shower head forced into her mouth, and it was that which actually killed her in the end, was the cause of death.
But who could have carried out such an horrific attack? Had Marina become sucked into a gangland dispute and paid the ultimate price for it?
We'd heard that she had gone to court to do with this gang-related thing.
Yeah.
We thought she'd just got her. They'd found out where she lived and got her.
In the Lincolnshire town of Boston, police are investigating the murder of 33-year-old Marina Urte, who was found in her own home, beaten and drowned in the bath. Her boyfriend, Alexander Cudworth, is in prison, serving an 18-year sentence for a vicious attack during a gangland dispute. Whilst he is ruled out as a suspect, there are suspicions that Marina has been murdered in a gangland revenge attack.
After it happened, we used to see this really spruced up black car coming past. We kept thinking, oh, is this to do with, like, this gang-related thing? That's pretty much everybody's first thoughts, wasn't it?
But police are keeping an open mind.
It's the age-old adage, ABC of investigating. Accept nothing, believe no one, and check absolutely everything. If it was anything to do with the grievous bodily harm trial, and Marina being acquitted of conspiracy, and almost a revenge attack by perhaps those people that have been the victims in the first place. One would expect it to be almost tit for tat. Revenge is usually about, I'm going to give you what you gave to me. That's what revenge is. Revenge doesn't normally extend to attacking a defenseless woman in her own home, viciously and violently over a prolonged period of time. That, to me, was not a revenge attack.
Police also suspect that the lack of a forced entry points to a different explanation.
That immediately means to me, this is personal. That would be my first thought there. This is not a random attack. This isn't a burglary gone wrong or anything like that. This is personal, for some reason or other. Whoever did this to Marina knew her, and Marina knew them and had let them in the house.
With this latest theory, police look closely at Marina's inner circle.
One of the key elements is always to find out who saw the victim alive last.
Police would have been looking to question those who were closely connected to Marina. That would have been her former partner and her former husband, also her sister who lived nearby. As every police officer knows, most murders are committed by people known to the victim, so it would have been their primary avenue of inquiry.
As Marina and her ex-husband Gitis had shared custody of their daughter, police question him about the last time he saw her.
Under questioning, Gitis did disclose his movements on the night and day before the murder. He disclosed that he'd been celebrating his birthday.
He immediately said, yeah, Marina had come to his house. They'd then gone to a supermarket and bought some whiskey, and then gone back to her flat.
This would have been late in the evening into the early hours of the next day. And he said that he left Marina's flat at 2 o'clock in the morning, and that when he left, she was fine.
They had a pleasant evening. They'd had a few drinks, but there was nothing else. He was saying, it's not me.
With Gitis admitting to being with Marina on the night of the murder, but claiming to have left on good terms at 2 a.m., investigators have little else to link him to the murder.
That he'd said that he'd been at the flat the night before. That poses actually an interesting dilemma for a senior investigating officer. Is what do you do with that? It's only suspicion. There is no hard evidence. You are hoping you're going to find some hard evidence through maybe forensic examination of the scene, CCTV, or anything like that, but that takes a long time.
Even without evidence against Gitis, police need to act fast in case he is in any way connected to the crime.
As the senior investigating officer, it's your decision whether to arrest a suspect, and not only whether to arrest a suspect at that time, when you do it and under what circumstances. The senior investigating officer in this case took the view that it was the most advantageous way for the investigation was to make an early arrest.
Gitis Griskevicius is arrested on suspicion of the murder of his ex-wife Marina.
It won't have been an easy decision. There would have been a train of thought undoubtedly about, well, there's no evidence here that he's involved. There will have been opinions within senior officers, probably more senior than the SIO in this case, that he shouldn't have been arrested. We would know that we'd only be able to keep him in custody a maximum of 24 hours, and if no evidence came forward during that period of time, he'd have to be released. So it's not a straightforward decision.
With the time ticking against them, police further question Gitis under caution.
He gave the same story as he'd done before he'd been arrested, that he'd been there with Marina voluntarily, he'd left around 2 o'clock in the morning, and she was fine when he left her.
But with Gitis now in custody, police can delve deeper into his life to find any evidence that might connect him to Marina's murder.
Once we arrest him, the purpose of that is to enable the police to search the house, search his vehicle, search him, examine him for any injuries.
On closer examination, officers notice an injury on Gitis's right hand, which he explains was caused by an accident. Despite the suspicious injury and Gitis being the last known person to see Marina alive, the police have no further evidence. And Gitis has been in custody for almost 24 hours.
One has to make a decision. Have we got enough evidence here to charge him? Clearly they hadn't.
Gitis is released on bail.
The news obviously left question marks for people in the area. Was this the man? Had they caught the killer? Or was the perpetrator still at large?
Police now move their focus away from Gitis and cast the net wider. They trawl through hours of CCTV across the local area in hopes to find anything that might lead them to Marina's killer.
They would have trawled hundreds of hours of CCTV.
CCTV examination is an art form. It isn't just a straightforward process. It can take weeks and weeks and weeks to do it methodically. Some of the bigger police forces these days have dedicated teams whose sole job it is to do that.
And after hours of examination, police find footage from the early hours of the 20th of May, the day Marina was thought to have been murdered. And it places Gitis back in the frame.
They managed to find him on CCTV.
The footage shows Gitis running towards Marina's house at 9:30 p.m. Rather than he had claimed, heading there with Marina after a party at his. Then, 2 hours later at 11:30 p.m, Marina and Gitis are seen together at a nearby supermarket. And then, crucially, he is caught on camera returning to his house much later than 2 a.m, the time he told police.
So he had not left Marina's home at 2 o'clock in the morning and gone straight home. He was seen around 7:30 in the morning, and I believe he got back to his own premises around about 8 o'clock in the morning. So straight away they know he wasn't where he said he was, when he said he was there. The story he gave from the outset was a pack of lies.
The CCTV footage disproves Gitis' story and places him near to the scene on the morning of the murder. But the police still need more evidence to strengthen their case.
The police would then start thinking, well, how can we bolster this circumstantial evidence?
The police then begin to find other pieces of evidence that link him to the murder. A pair of his shorts were found in his washing machine, which he was seen to be wearing on CCTV.
And lo and behold, no blood was found on the shorts or anything like that. But the police would then say, well, where's the hoodie that he was wearing? Where's the T-shirt that he was wearing? Where's his footwear? Where are his socks? None of which was ever found. The fact that he couldn't account for that, again, just adds to the circumstantial evidence.
Gitis' phone is seized and searched, which raises further suspicion.
They found he had inadvertently wiped all the data off his phone.
The police believe Gitis deliberately wiped his phone to hide incriminating messages. But with the only evidence being circumstantial, and forensic results from the scene showing no strong link to Gitis being the killer, will it be enough to charge him for murder? Or will the theory of a gang-related revenge attack for the crimes of her boyfriend hold the truth to the killing? Lincolnshire police are investigating the murder of 33-year-old mum Marina Urte. And although they have circumstantial evidence that links her ex-husband Gitis Griskevikus to the crime, they are lacking forensic evidence. Meanwhile, her new boyfriend is serving 18 years in prison for a violent assault on a rival gang, and there's a theory Marina could have been killed in a revenge attack. Then the police make an announcement. The Crown Prosecution Service has decided to send the case to trial. And it's Gitis they believe is the killer.
Following the CCTV and other pieces of evidence, Gitis was rearrested and charged with the murder.
Gitis pleads not guilty. And with the evidence being mainly circumstantial, the police have their work cut out to prove there is enough to convict him.
Certainly the lead up to a trial for murder involves a phenomenal amount of work. Making sure the evidence is presented in the correct fashion, making sure witnesses turn up. My feeling at the beginning of every murder trial I've been involved in was a fear of being perceived to have let the victim and the victim's family down. They are completely beholding upon you as an individual to bring some justice for their loved one.
In March 2017, the trial into Marina's murder begins at Lincoln Crown Court. And as Marina's friends and family enter the courtroom, they come face to face with her alleged killer.
When I came in, he looked at me with the eyes full of almost tears, and he looked at me as if I didn't do it.
As the trial begins, Marina's close friends reveal to the court details of her relationship with Gitis.
I remember she came to me when she was already heavily pregnant, and she was complaining that she's put on so much weight and Gitis is not happy anymore because she's not in the same shape as before. So I did notice that something was off. Why would you judge your wife for being a bit overweight when she's carrying your child?
And as time went by, the relationship continued to break down.
Then Gitis stopped investing into the family, doing anything around the house. And she would work and she would take all overtimes. So sometimes she would go weeks without a day off. And she would mention to him, maybe you should work more, or maybe you should at least wash the dishes. Then he would turn it back on her and humiliate her in terms of the weight or how she looks.
Marina then began to consider a life away from her husband.
She said to me that she wants a real man who'd take care of her and she would feel loved and cared for.
And in 2015, Marina broke off the relationship. And it wasn't long before she met her new partner, Alexander.
Marina was very happy. She said that I finally feel like a woman and I finally feel like I've been cared for. He gave me a perfume, and she said that over all these years with Gitis, he never gave her anything like that. She felt so much appreciated.
And friends revealed to the court that Gitis did not take Marina's new relationship well.
Piskevicius was still besotted with Marina. They'd split acrimoniously, but he still harboured a desire to get back with her. And he hated the fact that she was now with someone else.
He was described as being very jealous about the new boyfriend.
I met with him a few times on the street, and he said, how could she leave him? Because he's so good in bed. So he was not even thinking about the quality of life. He was raging about if his size is larger than his, how could she swap me for someone else?
But when Marina was arrested for perverting the course of justice, Gitis decides to use their daughter as leverage to get her back.
When police come up and arrested her, she didn't have a passport, she lost the job, and she didn't have a place to live. She lost everything, and in that moment, he got the girl.
She was praying and hoping that everything was gonna work out so she could then finally reunite with her daughter.
When she was fully acquitted of any wrongdoing, Marina asked to be reunited with her daughter, but Gitis refused.
I told him that you probably ought to allow Marina see the child, at least under the supervision of social workers in the children's center once a week for a few hours. She's probably missing her mother, and he was absolutely reluctant to do that, and he mentioned that we don't even mention mother's name in the house. Her girl was not allowed to pronounce her name in front of him.
He was sending her nasty messages about the girl, like no money, no honey, asking for money. Then he was taking girl out from the country, which she supposed not to do, and then posting in a Facebook saying, oh, hello, we are here. That was very nasty.
And things only got worse for Marina.
Marina had made all sorts of complaints against Griskevicius. She couldn't prove any of them. I think her vehicle had been damaged, she'd had a pedal bike stolen. She didn't know that it was him for sure, but she thought it really was, and it frightened her. There were a couple of occasions when she went to the police because he was seen filming her on his mobile phone, arriving at her house unannounced, and it spooked her to such an extent she went to the police.
I think Marina had confided in certain friends that she was worried that Gitis was stalking her.
She rings me one day, she says, he was standing on the corner of the street looking at the house.
However, in the last few days of Marina's life, hers and Gitis' relationship seemed to rekindle.
They restarted the communication. She rang me and she was so happy to say, oh, you don't know what just happened. I will see the child soon and he's talking to me in a nice way. And she was willing to resolve the conflict for her, for the daughter, and for him, for Gitis even. Just before the day, she rang me and she was very excited. And she said, he said that he loves me and he wants to get back. He's the father of my child. Maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't. And he wants to come over. He wants to celebrate his birthday with me. And I did tell her, do not meet him on your own.
Griskevicius was still besotted with Marina. I think he saw an opportunity there to say, right, I'm the father of your child. This is my birthday. Let's celebrate together, give it another go, and rekindle our marriage.
Back in the courtroom, it appears with only circumstantial evidence, Gitis could still walk free. But then a new witness takes to the stand and flips the case on its head.
This individual contacted the police and said, this guy admitted to me what he'd done. He admitted to me that he'd murdered Marina, and then he admitted that he'd set fire to the premises. And I'm prepared to give evidence to that effect.
After a grueling 2-week trial at Lincoln Crown Court, the jury returns its verdict. Gitis Griskevicius is found guilty of Marina Urte's murder. He is sentenced to life with a minimum of 23 years in prison.
The guy came and gave his evidence, and obviously the jury took it on board, and ultimately, with that and with all the circumstantial evidence, unanimously convicted him of murder. He's got to spend 23 years in jail before he even becomes eligible for parole. That's a long time by anyone's book. But you know, he committed one of the most horrific crimes you could imagine. On a defenseless mother of his own child, my view is that he deserves every one of those 23 years.
But why did Gitis decide to kill Marina? On that fateful night on the 20th of May 2016.
I think It was about the fact that she was shunning his advances. Even though her new boyfriend was going to be in prison for 18 years, she still wanted to stick by him. He couldn't bear the thought of that. And I think he thought, well, if I can't have you, no one else can.
I think Gatus was jealous and had been humiliated by the new relationship, and that was his motive for the murder.
He'd taken the poor woman, battered and beaten, from one part of the flat to another, where he attacked her again, bundled her into a bath, and then drowned her with a hose. I mean, how callous and calculating can he get?
And for Marina's neighbours, her killing still haunts them to this day.
I always get the question, did you not hear anything? I'm like, no, I didn't. I'm like, so wish I did. It was in my mind for a very long time, thinking, why the hell could I not just hear anything? And then maybe we could have given her some hope. No matter how much danger I'd be in, I would have busted through the door and tried to help. 100%. If I'd have heard anything, I'd have gone straight in there and tried to help her. Even though I'd be putting myself at danger, I'd still help her, because nobody deserves to lose life like that.
And for Marina's friends and family, with the case behind them, they are slowly coming to terms with a life without her.
The biggest thing I miss about Marina is her liveliness. She was very, very positive girl, full with ideas, full with life.
I miss everything about her because I don't have anyone similar to her. She was a very good friend, and in my difficult situations, when I'm so upset and I'm so down, I know that she would be the person to turn to. She would just tell me, everything's gonna be all right. Don't worry about anything. Everything's gonna be perfect. And she had so much power in these words that I would straight away feel better. Yeah.
Stranger danger is rare but not impossible. The chilling Murdered at First Sight is new Wednesday at 9 on Sky Mix.
When police arrived at the scene, they found a body of a woman that had been badly beaten.
She had numerous injuries, more than 20 in total, mainly to her head.
She was covered in blood. It was a shocking sight.
She'd been battered to death. It looked like there'd maybe been a burglary.
The house had been ransacked.
The fact that this has happened in broad daylight, at a time when people are taking their children to school, it strikes fear throughout everybody.
A lot of people are scared living around here.
You just can't believe that it's happened.
The big fear is that our community is then under threat.
In the heart of the East Midlands lies historic Lincoln.
It's just got a wonderful, timeless feeling to it, Lincoln. We are a place of great historical interest. We've got everything, castles, cathedrals. There's a great many medieval churches, and there's a great waterway in the centre as well, the Brayford, established by the Romans. So we are a good tourist destination. And people like the fact we're not overly commercialised. We just think it's a wonderful, vibrant place.
And in recent years, Lincoln has become increasingly popular with overseas students.
The university, which is a huge university and, well, pretty much world famous, they've got colleges as well. Well, there are a lot of students, and a lot of the students are foreign nationals, many from the East Asian area. There is a nice mix.
To the south of Lincoln, on the River Witham, lies the suburb of Sincil Bank.
Sincilbank area of Lincoln is a very tight-knit community, being adopted by the students and working-class Lincoln folk. A stone's throw away from the football ground, it does have a very villagey feel. You will see children playing football in the street.
The Sincilbank community is very diverse. I've been a resident my whole life, and we have a lot of people that are from different ethnic backgrounds. And because we're so close to the university and stuff, we do get a lot of uni students coming to live down here, especially now that the university's getting more popular. We also have a lot of elderly people, but we always try and find a way to build that community together. It's more like a village. People are always supportive of each other.
It's just a nice, friendly place. Everybody knows everybody on the street and everybody chats with everybody. All the kids play out together. It's got a proper community vibe.
It's very close to the South Common, which is the major green area in the south of Lincoln.
You know, there's a lovely park there where people go and walk their dogs and can go and sit. So you have got the nice, idyllic, peaceful park. It's only a short distance away.
But the peace is shattered on one summer's day. At 12:20 p.m, police are called to an address in Sincilbank.
When police arrived at the scene, they found a body of a woman that had been badly beaten. She had appeared to have been beaten with a blunt object.
The crime scene is secured.
The police came, they cornered off the streets, they weren't allowed anywhere near your houses and stuff. No one really told us what happened.
A murder investigation is immediately launched, and it's not long before the body is identified as 29-year-old student Mingzi Yang. But who is Mingzi, and how had she become a victim of such a brutal murder?
Mingzi Yang was originally from China. She came to the UK in 2008, and she was studying English at Lincoln College. Initially, she lived in the Humberside area, and in 2012, she moved to the address in Sincilbank, where she lived with her partner, who she'd met fairly recently, Darren Grundy, and her young 5-year-old son.
Mingzi's son was from a previous relationship, but Darren quickly became part of the family.
As a couple, they were engaged to be married and were due to get married the following year.
But on the 17th of June, Darren had grown increasingly worried throughout the day when Mingzi failed to answer her phone.
He'd gone to work and he'd been trying to get hold of her throughout the day without any success. So he left work early and made his way to the address.
Darren arrives home and makes a shocking discovery.
He found a scene of devastation, really. It looked like it had been ransacked. It looked like there'd maybe been a burglary. There was a lot of blood in the address, and he discovered Mingzi's body.
And then he raised the alarm and the police were contacted.
As the police begin their investigation, they need to establish what Mingzi's last known movements were on the day of her murder.
Detectives will use a phrase sometimes that says if you find out how a person lived, then you'll find out how they died. It's about building up a detailed picture of that victim, because somewhere in there might just be the answer as to why this has happened and who's committed it. On the morning of the 17th of June, she'd gone and took her young son to the local primary school, which was a very short walk away, and returned to the address.
The killing was believed to have taken place in broad daylight, early in the morning after school, although the body wasn't discovered until Mr. Grundy raised the alarm.
The question is, who could possibly have wanted to harm Mingzi?
First thing that would go through my head is to try and establish exactly what has gone on.
The initial mystery for the police was that the house had been ransacked. There had been a burglary, and that possibly an intruder had killed Mingzi Yang.
News that a possible burglary has turned into a murder sends shockwaves across the local community.
There was fear and a sense of shock, because it's not something that happens with frequency in Lincoln at all. And the big fear is that our community is then under threat.
I remember hearing about it. My mum and my dad told me about it, and it was very upsetting. It's very traumatic knowing that it's basically on your front door. You know, you could go to sleep at night and something bad could happen. This could have been my mum, or this could have been my sister, or this could have been a relative that lived across the road.
Everybody was massively scared of what had happened because it was so close to home. It's 2 minutes away from the pub that I run. So that day, customers were coming in absolutely shocked and stunned with all the police cordons. It just is unheard of around here. You just can't believe that it's happened.
There was a genuine fear from people who lived in the local area that a burglar or intruder was at large and had carried out such a devastating crime in broad daylight. Neighbours were obviously concerned that this could possibly happen to them.
In the Lincoln suburb of Sincil-Bank, the community is shocked to hear of the murder of 29-year-old mum, Mingzi Yang, who has been beaten to death in her own home in what looks like a robbery gone wrong.
She was a local student. She'd got a child. We just couldn't believe that somebody like her had been killed.
And the fear on the streets is growing.
A lot of people are scared of living around here, knowing that something really bad's happened, and it's on your front door.
The first feeling is one of shock, and then wanting to know really what had happened, was the public at risk.
When something like this happens in the community, there's a massive impact. There's lots of children and families in this area, so to have something so tragic and awful happening on your doorstep, it strikes fear throughout everybody.
That's all we were talking about. Everybody was just in utter disbelief that something like that could happen so close to home.
And a lot of them will have been friendly with Mingzi Yang in any event, so apart from the personal impact, you really do get a build-up of tension throughout the community. People feel understandably frightened. Who's committed it? Why have they committed it? Are they going to come back and do it again? If it is a burglary, is our house going to be the next target?
With such a brutal murder happening on a busy street, police are taken aback at the boldness of the crime.
Mingzi had a young son who had been dropped off at school, and the killing was believed to have taken place sometime between about 9 and 10 a.m.
The fact that this has happened in broad daylight, at a time when people are taking their children to school, in a place like this, which appears quite peaceful and tranquil, is actually quite shocking.
The idea that an intruder had managed to get into this house unnoticed and carry out this killing was obviously very frightening for local people.
With the attack suspected to have occurred early in the day, police reach out to the locals for any potential information that may lead them to Mingzi's attacker.
You're really looking for witnesses. Something that's happened like that with so many injuries and so much devastation within the house would presumably have made some noise. You know, had she been screaming and shouting for help? Have the neighbours heard or seen anything?
In a case like this, in an area like this, the community are absolutely vital. They are the eyes and ears, and they're going to know things and see things that the police will never get to find out about. So it's really important to get out in amongst the community, make yourself visible and ask those important questions, because just by being here, you may be approached by a member of the public who tells you something that in isolation might seem quite minor, but actually, when you put it together as part of a jigsaw puzzle, it could actually help to solve the case.
Local reporter Richard Van Plu is also on the scene.
The first time I became aware of Mingzi's death was when the police put out a press release saying that the body of a woman had been found. Killings like this, obviously in rural areas, don't happen every day, and people are quite rightly shocked. And sometimes when you arrive at the scene, people will talk to you. It's their main way of dealing with what's happened.
But so far, door-to-door inquiries have uncovered no leads to Mingzi's attacker. With the fear in the area growing, forensics arrived to examine the scene.
When I arrived at the scene, it was a shocking sight. Mingzi was face upwards and she was covered in blood. She was in main living room, there was large pooled, smeared blood staining on the carpet all around Mingsy's body. There was a white radiator near where Mingsy's body was found, and there was spots of blood spattered onto the white radiator. The smears and pools of blood along the carpet had indicated to me that she'd been assaulted at one end of the room, and she was on the floor crawling towards the kitchen in an attempt to escape. The blood spatters on the radiator and on the adjacent wall indicated that as she was crawling along, she was being hit with the blunt instruments repeatedly.
Post-mortem results then arrive, which further adds to the horrific nature of Mingsy's death.
A post-mortem found Mingsy's injuries were quite severe.
She had numerous injuries, more than 20 in total, mainly to her head. She also had, interestingly enough, some defence wounds, including a fracture to one of her hands, which clearly indicated that she'd been trying to fend the attacker off. But the actual number of injuries and the nature of those injuries were very, very severe and would only ever have resulted in one thing, which was her death. She'd basically been battered to death.
But as police scour the scene and surrounding areas, there is no sign of the murder weapon.
The weapon used was believed to be a very hard, heavy, blunt object. But interestingly enough, it wasn't recovered from the scene, which suggests that potentially the offender may have possibly brought it with them, but certainly taken it away with them, which does suggest a degree of premeditation and planning and the realisation, even in the moment of everything happening, that actually they might have left some evidence on that weapon.
Police start to suspect that their initial theory, that Mingsy disturbed a burglar who then attacked her, could be wrong. This is reinforced when detectives examine Mingsy's possessions.
Burglary is normally where somebody goes in and steals something. Sounds fairly obvious, but that's what happens. So if there were items in that house, such as TVs, electrical goods, jewellery, cash, you would expect someone that's committing a burglary to take those. The fact that items didn't appear to be missing is really important.
And new forensic evidence casts further doubt that Mingsy disturbed a burglary taking place.
The perpetrator had gone upstairs and opened a number of drawers, which made it look like a burglary. However, the intruder had done this after he'd assaulted Mingsy. We know that because Mingsy's blood was on the stairs in the form of footwear marks, and her blood was on the drawers in the form of finger marks, glove marks in blood. In my mind, your average burglar, if they're startled, they're just going to want to get out the property. They don't want to harm anybody, they just don't want to get caught. Why would a perpetrator repeatedly beat Mingsy and then take the risk of going upstairs to see if they could find something in her bedroom? It just didn't quite add up.
By re-examining the post-mortem results, police suspect this attack may actually have been carried out by someone closer to home.
The nature and the number of injuries and the fact that they were all caused to Mingsy's head area is a suggestion that perhaps this is a little bit more personal. It's almost like a humiliation and perhaps not just a stranger attack or a burglar that's been disturbed.
Considering the nature of Mingsy's injuries, the police would have to consider whether this was an argument that had gone wrong.
In the majority of murder cases, there is some kind of connection between the victim and the offender.
90% of murders are committed by people who know the victim, and normally very closely.
As police begin to suspect that Mingsy could have known her attacker and that whoever it was had a grudge against her, they look to her previous relationships, beginning with her ex-husband, 33-year-old Wai Hong Sang.
Police contacted Mr. Sang. He lived in the Grimsby area. He was a chemistry graduate with dual nationality, so he was a Brit as well as Chinese. He had gone through a recent divorce with Mingsy, and they shared a son together.
Police want to know where Zhang was on the day his ex-wife was murdered.
Mr. Zhang was asked to provide a written statement of his movements on the 17th. He disclosed to police that he had taken the day off work.
Zhang's statement explains why he took the day off and outlines a clear alibi for the time Mingzi was murdered.
He had the day off work and he went to Sherwood Pines in the Nottingham area, where he went trail biking.
And he could provide car parking tickets and receipts to back this up.
With a solid alibi and evidence to prove it, Zhang is discounted from the inquiries. So police shift their focus elsewhere, and to one person in particular.
The police, they would be examining who Mingzi had spoken to, who were the last people that had seen her. Obviously, in this case, Darren Grundy was virtually living at Mingzi Yang's address.
Darren Grundy would likely to have been the last person to see Mingzi Yang alive. He's the person who's in a current relationship with her. He's the person who discovered the body.
Mingzi Yang's fiancé, Darren Grundy, is taken in for questioning. And it isn't long before the police make an announcement.
Darren Grundy is arrested on suspicion of the murder of Mingzi Yang. He's taken into police custody, and the police think that they have their man.
All of Darren's clothing was seized and submitted to the laboratory for examination.
The police were convinced it obviously had the hallmarks of a crime of passion.
It's been 24 hours since the body of 29-year-old student Mingzi Yang was discovered at her home in the Lincoln suburb of Sinsel Bank. And police have arrested her fiancé, 32-year-old Darren Grundy, on suspicion of murder.
Darren Grundy was the person that reported her death and was also possibly the last person to see her alive.
He was taken into police custody, during which time he's questioned and the police seek to gather further evidence and information to strengthen their case.
Police believe the attack on Mingzi was carried out by someone who knew her.
Police were convinced that this was a crime of passion. It's not unusual with crimes of passion that the victim is badly beaten. Mingzi had been beaten and sustained over 20 injuries.
The hallmarks of a crime of passion, I would say, are extreme violence, humiliation, degradation, that sort of thing. Doing something that's really personal, so, destroying something that really means a lot to somebody. And often it is extreme, gratuitous violence, where there's clearly been some kind of loss of self-control, because it is such a personal issue.
Now in police custody, Darren faces intense questioning from detectives.
The interview of a murder suspect is different from the interview of a witness. It's far more detailed. The officers that interview a murder suspect will be specially trained, and they use tactics and techniques with the intention of getting as much information as possible. During the interviews, Darren Grundy maintains that he went to work that day and he was trying to get hold of Mingzi Yang during the day. He couldn't get hold of her, so he decided to leave work early. And he came home from work early and he found her dead in the home.
But police aren't convinced by his account and detain him further.
In order to hold someone in custody for more than 36 hours, the police need to go to a magistrate's court in order to keep that person in custody. So this is a serious situation for Darren Grundy. He's in custody, and obviously the police think that they have their man.
When police receive forensic results from Darren Grundy's clothing, the findings change the course of the investigation.
When we looked at Darren's clothing in the laboratory, there was no blood spattering on there. The blood staining on him was quite minimal, and it's not what I would expect from the perpetrator. I would expect to find a lot of small spots of blood on the perpetrator's clothing, especially around his lower legs. If you imagine when Mingzi's moving around the room and she's being constantly struck, the blood is spattering onto that radiator. Those small spots of blood will also spatter back onto the assailant. Didn't see anything like that at all on Darren's clothing.
But then a member of the public comes forward with some information that turns the case on its head.
The Sincilbank area of Lincoln is a very tight-knit community, and following the news of Mingsy's death, the teenage boy who was in the Sincilbank area on the morning of Mingsy's murder did come forward. He reported to police that he had seen a cyclist loitering very closely to the back passage of Mingsy's address.
The young boy saw a man on the pedal cycle cycling around this area, and he actually saw him go into an alleyway, which is where the address in question is.
He remembered clearly that that cyclist was wearing a blue workman's helmet rather than a cycling helmet. He made eye contact with the cyclist and then watched as he wheeled that bike into Mingsy's passageway.
But who was the cyclist? And could they be responsible for Mingsy's murder? The physical description the boy gives narrows down his identity.
This key witness reported to police the cyclist was also of East Asian appearance. The police now had to explore people who knew Mingsy matching that description.
And at this point, the police become aware that actually they've been looking at the wrong man. And they focus their inquiries in a different direction.
Darren Grundy is released without charge. And attention now falls on an individual from Mingsy's past.
The description of the cyclist matched Mingsy's ex-husband, Mr. Sang.
Wai Hong Sang had already provided police with a convincing alibi, saying he was over 40 miles from Mingsy's home on the day of her murder, enjoying a day out biking at Sherwood Pines Forest.
Mr. Sang has a solid alibi. He'd travelled to Sherwood Pines, where he had spent the day trail biking. So police are then tasked with establishing his movements exactly and whether it is possible that this cyclist could be Mr. Sang. In the eyes of the investigation, there is obviously a big difference between police suspecting that this cyclist may be Mr. Sang and may have committed the murder, but proving it to a jury is obviously a whole different matter.
In an attempt to track down the mysterious individual spotted by a local teenager, police trawl through thousands of hours of CCTV from across Lincoln.
There are so many CCTV cameras now, private, local authority. People have them on their houses as well. It's a real critical part of any murder investigation. The police will be looking at trying to find that person at that location or as close as possible, and then trying to find where they went from there. Where did the cyclist come from? Ideally, what did they do whilst they were in the area, and then where did they go afterwards?
And after hours of rigorous detective work, police finally spot the cyclist.
What it actually showed was that this particular cyclist, who was quite distinctive in description, particularly with a hat that he was wearing, was picked up on 40 separate occasions in 16 different locations in and around the Lincoln City area. The route of the cyclist was quite clear from the footage that he'd come into the city in the early hours of the morning, then made his way out of the city again.
The man is seen cycling away from Lincoln just after 9 a.m, around 3 hours before Mingsy's body was discovered. Detectives analyse the footage to see if the cyclist in question is indeed Mingsy's ex-husband, Wai Hong Sang.
One of the main difficulties in proving identity of someone on CCTV is the quality of the footage. It's vastly improved since many years ago when it was really poor, but you still do have systems now, for one reason or another, that are not particularly clear. They're grainy. You may struggle to identify someone.
With the identity of the cyclist still unclear from the CCTV footage, police bring Sang in for questioning.
The police will be looking at his background, his movements and his relationship, trying to gather as much information. They'll be looking at inconsistencies with his account, and it may be that he can't give certain information. So they'll be trying to build up a case against him using the factual information that they know and anything which can either confirm or disprove his account.
Under caution, Sang gives the same account he provided in his written statement.
Wei Sang told the police that he had gone to Sherwood Pines in Nottingham. He'd driven straight there from his home address in Grimsby, and he'd been there for the duration of the day. He was also able to produce some receipts from parking in the Nottingham area and a petrol receipt as well.
Despite Sang providing receipts to prove his alibi, police attempt to investigate his digital footprint by looking into his phone activity on the day.
He had turned his phone off when he left home, which he said was the usual thing that he would do when he was going trail biking.
So what the police decided to do instead was to examine the sat-nav on his car.
And what officers discover reveals a major hole in Sang's story.
The inbuilt car sat-nav actually showed that he hadn't gone directly from Grimsby to Nottingham, but he'd driven from Grimsby to Lincoln, where he'd parked in a lay-by for at least 2 hours, and then afterwards had then gone to Nottingham. So there was a huge hole in the alibi.
It's a shocking revelation. Police now know Sang was parked up in a lay-by on the outskirts of Lincoln on the day of Mingzi's murder. Could it be that Sang had cycled from this location to Mingzi's home in Sinsel Bank? Police look again at the CCTV of the suspicious cyclist.
The analysis of the cyclist and the CCTV showed quite clearly with the times involved that he would have had the opportunity to have parked his vehicle on the outskirts of Lincoln, cycled into Lincoln to Mingzi's address, killed Mingzi, and then cycled back out of the city again, back to his car, and then driven to Sherwood Pines in Nottingham, where he claimed that he'd been all day.
This key CCTV evidence proved Mr. Sang did have the time available to cycle into Lincoln and murder his ex-wife.
But the CCTV footage is still unable to prove if Wai Hong Sang was at Mingzi's home on the day of the murder. The only evidence police have is circumstantial and unlikely to hold up in court. But then, forensic results from a search at Sang's address returned from the lab.
The police submit various items for forensic examination from Wai Sang. There were items which were actually purchased after he'd separated from Mingzi.
We examined a number of items from him, including a watch.
Hải Phòng. Xong mình sẽ mượn xe để đi sang Cát Bà luôn, đi phà qua Cát Bà. Nói hay nhỉ? Không thì mình sẽ đi ấy nhé. Đi Cô Tô nhé, Cô Tô đắt lắm. Cô Tô kiểu trong đấy thì cái gì cũng rẻ luôn ấy, không hề bị chặt chém một cái một cái gì luôn. Nhưng vé đi tàu giờ đấy rất đắt. Thề vé đi tàu giờ đắt điên. Kiểu là 300.000 một vé. Còn cái tàu bé thì là tàu bé như kiểu bọn chị đi Quan Lạn ấy là 250. Tại vì Cô Tô nó xa đôi Quan Lạn cơ mà.
Tiếp theo mình sẽ sử dụng màu nâu của mình để tô tiếp phần thân của chú chó này nha.
Ê, hình như hôm đấy em gặp chị đúng không?
Hôm đấy mày đi là tao cũng đi chứ không phải là...
Hôm đấy đi là em cũng đi nhưng mà đi hai phía khác nhau.
Tao đi Quan Lạn.
Đã quá. Thiền to. To vãi. Và như vậy là mình đã sử dụng xong màu xanh nước biển để tô bức tranh rồi. Và bây giờ mình sẽ cất màu xanh nước biển này đi nha. Và màu tiếp theo mình tô thì đó chính là màu cam. Mình sẽ sử dụng màu cam để tô những cái phần bên trong của bánh xe nhé. đấy không gặp nhỉ? Hôm đấy chị đi thuyền lúc bấy giờ.
Đạp ô tô, đạp con lại liên quan gì đâu.
Nhưng mà ý là thuyền chạy ấy, lúc mà chị ra mà em cũng không gặp ở trong
Liên quan
cảng ao tiền đấy.
Không biết. Duyên vừa thôi chứ, duyên quá bất ngờ lắm. Hôm nọ tao gặp con Nhi ở bến nước ngầm.
Nhi nào? Nhi Thành á?
Thành là bà tao luôn đấy, đừng bớt gọi thế lại.
Thế xong như nào?
Gặp thôi, hết. Xong nó đi xe 16 nhưng mà tao đợi cảnh ra đấy đón luôn.
Nó đi xe 16 á?
Chả hiểu.
16 đi về đâu nhỉ?
Không biết.
Yên Nghĩa à?
Chả biết
Lần
đâu.
đi nhưng mà không nhớ là con đấy. Như con đấy là Yên Nghĩa nước ngầm. Sao con này nó không đi sang Yên Nghĩa hả? Tại vì nó fan đi cao nó chọn bên đấy mà.
Ai biết.
Rồi nhỉ. Bên này có bến xe Yên Nghĩa mà. Mát lắm. Con Nhi trên này ở nhà nó à? Nó có nhà như nào độ đúng không? Nó ở nhà đấy luôn à?
Chắc là không, thuê trọ hay sao?
Nhưng mà thế bảo ai bảo là nhà
Ký
đấy
túc
là
xá hay sao?
nhà đấy là xa lắm mà.
Ngay trên xã Đàn. Bố tao bảo thế.
Xã Đàn á? Vui vãi, trên này luôn này.
Biết rồi.
Thế nhưng tòa nhà cũng đẹp còn gì nữa.
Nhà xưa rồi, sửa xưa rồi.
Ý là view cũng chill ấy. Xã Đàn. Hôm đó em vừa mua ghế ở xã Đàn.
Này, trên lẫn trường tao.
Chân gà. Đấy, cứ khen chị là ngon ấy.
Còn ngõ nhà mình gì cũng có luôn.
Thế á? Tôi không biết nhỉ.
Nó thấy cái biển tròn tròn. Chân gà xả tắc.
À, đầu bên kia thì ngõ kia thì.
Mình ít đi bên đấy mình chả để ý.
Em không đi bên đấy, em toàn đi bên này thôi.
Rảnh đâu, quay ra bên đấy chi.
Và như vậy là mình đã tô xong một cái hình tròn bên trong cái bánh xe rồi, và mình sẽ tiếp tục tô cái hình tròn trong bánh xe ở phía bên đằng sau này nữa nhé. Và như vậy là mình đã sử dụng xong màu cam để tô bức tranh rồi, và bây giờ mình sẽ cất màu cam này đi. Và mình sẽ sử dụng tiếp là màu xanh than nhé. Mình sẽ sử dụng màu xanh than để tô nốt những cái phần bên ngoài của bánh xe này là đã hoàn thiện xong bức tranh rồi nha. Thôi tuần sau em về cho nó có không khí đôi hẳn. Sao chị bảo tuần sau em về nhỉ? Chị vừa nói cái gì tuần sau về nhỉ?
Chịu. 16 là 16 đi.
Sao 16 đi?
15 hay 16 chủ nhật.
Đi
vào chủ nhật.
Chủ nhật là 15.
Đấy. Thế hôm nay bao nhiêu rồi? Thế hôm nay phải về lấy chăn rồi đúng không? Về bác chăn đi thì đi công sự. Coi như là về sắp đồ.
Nhà thủy không